Hey guys! Tonight we slip quietly through the creaking corridors of a late 16th century manor to eavesdrop on the famously long, ankle-numbing ritual of Tudor bedtime prayers. The air is damp, laced with the earthy scent of peat smoke and the sweeter breath of crushed lavender tucked between coarse linen sheets. Wax from a lone tallow candle gutters down its side, hissing the way your phone charger sometimes does. Except, of course, there's no phone here, so good luck doom-scrolling your way out of this century. A floorboard moans beneath your felt-soled slippers, and in the adjacent hall a half-tame peacock mutters a complaint you can't quite translate. You lean against timber that was an oak sapling when Columbus was still asking for sponsorship money, and you wonder how anyone managed to sleep surrounded by so many drafty arrow slits. One cheeky reality check slips into your mind. Between the cold stone walls, the open hearth, and the required kneeling on hard oak for extended prayer, you probably won't survive this without acquiring a bruise, a chill, and at least one dramatic story for your next time travel podcast. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The candlelight glimmers across a small bound volume, the Book of Hours, printed in deep black ink and illuminated with gold leaf that catches every restless flicker of flame. You tiptoe closer. Henry VIII once demanded that every good subject own a version of this prayer book, a mainstream fact that kept printers busier than a modern barista on Pumpkin Spice Day. Yet here's the twist no one tweeted about. Your host added margin notes complaining that the intercessory psalms made her knees lock faster than the manor gates at curfew. You can almost hear her quill scratching. A private sigh encoded in spidery ink. A soft bell rings 3 times. That's your cue to shuffle into the solar, the family's private living space. You kneel carefully because you remember the splinter risk, and begin the regimen. First the Pater Noster, then the Ave Maria, then a litany of saints long enough to beat out the director's cut of any superhero movie. As you whisper along in stilted ecclesiastical Latin, you notice the window's stained glass casting jewel-toned patches across your hands. Those colors are soothing, but let's be honest. Even a kaleidoscope loses its sparkle when your legs go numb. Joke number 1 slides in. You consider inventing a Tudor-era standing desk, but you're pretty sure the household carpenter would charge extra for ergonomic footrests. Your breath fogs. The hearth in the corner has burned low, its embers sulking beneath a pyramid of ash. You imagine stoking it, but that would involve standing, and standing would mean interrupting the prayers, and interrupting the prayers would earn you a sharp look from Lady Margaret, whose eyebrow game is lethal even without neon highlighter. She clears her throat now, signaling a switch to the penitential psalms. Historians still argue whether these extra verses lengthened nightly devotion because people were genuinely pious or because parents discovered they were a convenient way to tire fidgety children. Either way, you soldier on, repeating words whose meaning blurs into a gentle hum. Joke number 2 flutters by. You silently bet your last silver groat that at least one Tudor teen mumbled the medieval equivalent of blah 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 under their breath, and immediately feared excommunication as the prayers wind toward the Magnificat. Your knees stage a protest. They creak like unoiled hinges. You shift your weight. The movement jostles the scent of the rushes strewn over the floor, and suddenly you catch a note of rosemary. A quirky fringe tidbit surfaces. Some herbalists claimed that kneeling on rosemary-scented rushes guaranteed more vivid dreams, preferably involving polite angels rather than, say, Henry's accountants. No one has verified the science. Double-blind trials weren't exactly a Tudor hobby, but you decide there are worse things than smelling like a roast chicken's garnish. Outside, rain patters on the leaded glass panes. The rhythm aligns with the slow cadence of prayer, soothing in its own metronomic way. Somewhere in the dark, a dairymaid coughs, and you picture her trying to recite the same lines while mentally tallying tomorrow's butter churning. The shared weariness floats through the manor like wood smoke. Yet you keep going because Tudor etiquette says stopping early would be as shocking as microwaving your plate at a 5-course banquet. Joke number 3 drifts in. You secretly wish for a medieval snooze button. Pull a rope, ring a bell, and the priest pauses everything so you can stretch. Sadly, no bell exists for that purpose. The only rope nearby is connected to the garderobe latch, which you definitely do not want to tug mid-prayer. Minutes stretch into a small eternity. Your shoulders slump, then lift again when Lady Margaret leads the final collect. The Latin syllables roll across the chamber like gentle surf, and you find yourself swaying with each in, as though the manor itself floats gently on a sea of incense and repetition. You're almost lulled into believing you could fall asleep right here, kneeling upright like a devotional statue, if not for the steady complaint of your joints. Then comes a hush, soft, total, and relieved. A single ember pops in the hearth, punctuating the silence like a period. The prayers have ended, but the ritual continues. You rise slowly, blood rushing back into tingling feet, and follow the household toward their bedchambers. As you shuffle past a carved oak chest, you spot a pewter basin of water. Its surface reflects your candle like a private moon. You dip your fingers, tracing cool circles, remembering that earlier we noticed lavender in the mattress. An echo that reminds you Tudor folk layered scents wherever they could, partly to mask, well, everything else. Lady Margaret murmurs something about holy water. Scholars debate whether this nightly sprinkling was universal habit or a regional flourish. Either way, you flick droplets toward the threshold, because when time-traveling guests copy local customs, doorways stay friendlier. The corridor narrows. Above, a timber beam forces you to duck. A faded tapestry hangs beside the next door. St. George, looking oddly tired himself, leans on a lance that droops like an umbrella in the rain. You suspect the weaver nodded off mid-stitch, much like you're tempted to do. Finally, you arrive at the chamber prepared for you. A modest pallet tucked beneath low eaves. The straw mattress crackles as you sit. You recall that mainstream fact. Even royal beds often brimmed with straw, layered under feathers if you were lucky, and the restless rustle was everyone's nighttime soundtrack. You slip under a wool blanket that smells faintly of lanolin and hearth smoke. The candle's glow drops, but your mind drifts back to the rosemary rushes, the endless Latin, the bell chime echoing like distant church towers. You smile at the absurdity of kneeling for longer than most modern workout routines, then remember our earlier ergonomic desk fantasy and chuckle. Your eyelids sag. The manor settles. For a moment you think you hear a distant lark, but it's only the wind exploring the eaves. You breathe once, twice, and accept that you've survived the anchor-dragging weight of Tudor bedtime prayers. Splinters optional but posture permanently corrected. Tomorrow, more rituals, more corridors, perhaps even that peacock gossiping with the dairymaid. For now, though, let the lavender and cooling embers weave their mingled fragrance through your thoughts. The echo of psalms becomes a hush, the hush melts into near silence, and the silence invites sleep. You lie there for a heartbeat, savoring the hush that follows the marathon of prayers. But Tudor nights are no vending machine for uninterrupted slumber. Almost as soon as your breathing steadies, another bell peals, this one from the parish steeple across the village green. Its bronze voice slides faintly through leaded windows, telling you it is well past curfew. A mainstream fact that kept Elizabethan street wanderers from testing the watchman's billy clubs. You pull the wool blanket higher, grazing your nose with lanolin-scented fibers. Joke number 1 tiptoes in. Congratulations, you've discovered the earliest version of blanket Wi-Fi. Signal strength excellent. Bandwidth 0. Outside your door, floorboards yawn under departing footsteps. The household scatters like chess pieces returning to their boxes. You picture Lady Margaret wobbling on protest-stiff knees, muttering about tomorrow's accounts, while that disapproving peacock waddles behind, feathers rustling like an overstarched ruff. You smile, partly because it's funny, but mostly because you're relieved you don't have feathers scraping Tudor splinters, and no sooner do your eyelids flutter closed than the chamber's single candle hisses. Its flame gutters, rallies, then finally surrenders, releasing a tendril of smoke that smells faintly of bacon, courtesy of pig fat blended into cheaper tallow. A quirky tidbit flickers to mind. Some thrifty households mixed fish oil into candles, guaranteeing a bedtime aroma best described as pilgrimage to low tide. You decide pig-flavored smoke is a luxury. Historians still argue whether fish oil candles were an urban myth or just the sort of penny-pinching heartbreak accountants adore. Darkness settles, thick as ink in that margin Lady Margaret once defaced. At first, you think you'll drift instantly into dreams, but the straw mattress crackles like dry leaves every time you exhale. You shift, straw mutters, you stop. Repeat. If only you had brought that imaginary standing desk. You could sleep vertically like a bat and skip the prickles. Joke number 2 unfolds. Maybe pitch the concept to the carpenter tomorrow. Introducing the Tudor Lena bed. Kneel by day, dangle by night, splinters guaranteed. Minutes drip past. Somewhere deeper in the manor, a dog sighs. Then another Tudor custom reveals itself. The first sleep. Many people of this era snoozed in 2 installments, waking around midnight for quiet tasks. A mainstream historical fact that modern sleep scientists name-drop like Renaissance art majors citing Michelangelo. Sure enough, a gentle knock patters at your door. You answer with a groggy eye, because apparently you're bilingual in period-correct mumbles. A servant, eyes heavy but polite, ushers you toward the great hall for the night's midpoint devotions, the less formal cousin to the earlier litany. This shorter ritual includes checking hearth embers, nibbling a cold oat cake, and yes, murmuring another psalm or two, because why sleep straight through when you can kneel twice? As you rise, your knees announce themselves like upset bagpipes. You remember rosemary rushes and wish they doubled as cushioning. The corridor is black as pitch, but tiny rushlights, thin reeds dipped in animal fat, flicker along the baseboards. Their glow paints wobbly halos on plaster, and you catch a whiff of herbal smoke. Here's your quirky moment. Some households flavored rushlights with thyme, believing it repelled night-wandering spirits. Whether ghosts resent garden herbs remains unverified. Historians still argue whether these aromatic lamps were folk magic or primitive air fresheners. Ghost or no ghost, the thyme smells like pizza toppings, and that sparks joke number 3. You consider inventing a Tudor pizzeria. No tomatoes yet, but hey, thyme-infused rushlight crust could be the next craze. You enter the great hall and find a small circle of souls huddled near Emberglow. The massive fireplace, once roaring during supper, now sulks under iron cauldrons licked by faint red tongues. You sink onto a bench, careful to avoid the warming pan. A shallow brass skillet filled with embers used to toast sheets before folks tumble back into bed. Someone slides it beneath a tapestry cushion, and steam curls upward where stray snowflakes from your cloak melt instantly. The group shares a sliver of oat cake, passing it like contraband joy. Crunch, hand off, crunch again. You taste barley, smoke, maybe lavender. Remember that mattress sachet? These people season everything with flowers except their moods, which remain stoic as stone gargoyles. The elder steward clears his throat to lead a brief responsory chant. You join in, your voice a raspy whisper, and think of the bell tones earlier, how they hung in the air like dew. The chant is mercifully short, thank St. George's droopy lance. When the final amen lands, participants exchange sleepy nods and shuffle off, leaving embers to glow alone. Returning to your pallet, you notice the chamber feels marginally warmer. A bedfellow, good old warming pan, now rests between the sheets, radiating comfort. Mainstream fact drop. Warmth at night mattered so much that wealthier Tudors employed bed-turners. Servants who preheated mattresses so masters might glide into dreamland without shivering. This manor lacks a formal bed-turner, but someone cared enough to swaddle your straw in heat. A kindness you pocket like a secret coin as you settle again. Straw rustles friendlier, pliant from warmth. Your thoughts wander back to that book of hours. Its gilded margins glowed fierce earlier. Now they drift through memory, glimmering gently, as though your imagination dipped them into moonlight. You recall Lady Margaret's complaint about knee-locking psalms, proof that even Tudor aristocrats risked sciatic rebellion. Her marginalia becomes a lullaby of ink, loops of script sighing across parchment. But night in England seldom passes without weather commentary. Rain strengthens, drumming on slate roof tiles overhead. Each drop thuds like a miniature drum, steady yet soft, ASMR before microphones existed. You synchronize your breath with the pattern inhale, pat-pat, exhale, whoosh. A sense of timelessness settles. Bedtime prayers, first sleep, second sleep. Such structures once tethered people to cosmic rhythms, sun and church bell and hearth glow. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep vanished due to artificial light or caffeine addiction. You just know that right now the schedule feels oddly humane, a built-in intermission for stretching and snacking. Your limbs loosen. A stray thought flits by. What if the peacock joins the chorus at dawn? Hopefully it respects musician etiquette and waits for a proper downbeat. If not, you might repurpose Lady Margaret's Book of Hours as an impromptu percussion inhibitor. Feathered Diva meets illuminated manuscript. Joke number, well, honorary 4? Let's stick to 3 per thousand. We'll count that as a bonus dream sequence. The warming pan's heat fades gradually, like applause after a lullaby. Straw crackles again, but now it's a quiet fireplace you nestle beside rather than on. You stretch one leg, grateful the mattress no longer stabs aggressively. Apparently straw tempers when toasted, a detail mattress commercials curiously omit. The lull spreads. Lavender, thyme smoke, pig bacon candle ghost, pattering rain, dying embers, and you're breathing. The manor exhales with you, oak beams creaking in agreeable harmony. You remember our earlier wish for a Tudor snooze button and realize segmented sleep is exactly that. Society built the pause in. Cheeky innovation. 1. 21st century alarm app. 0. Before consciousness slides fully away. You promise yourself you'll explore the chapel tomorrow. Rumor has it a relic lies hidden behind the altar, possibly St. Agatha's veil or, skeptics claim, merely an old kerchief. Historians still argue whether small manors ever housed true relics or simply local legends polished to a shine. Either way, you intend to peek gingerly after breakfast porridge season, no doubt with another handful of herbs. For now, your only mission is to coast on a wave of warmth, letting each raindrop lull you deeper. Rain softens. Bells cease. Even the straw grows quiet, as though understanding its role in tonight's symphony. You inhale lavender one last time, exhale every remaining splinter worry, and drift into the gap between prayers, the gentle valley of Tudor midnight, where dreams sow rosemary, peacocks gossip politely, and no one, not even a stern book of hours, dares rouse you too soon. First light sneaks across the beams like a shy cat, and before your eyelids fully compute sunrise, the manor's resident peacock decides to audition for lead trumpet. His screech ricochets off stone walls, rattling the candle stubs and, yes, whatever remains of your sanity. You roll over, straw crinkling a complaint, and immediately remember our earlier fantasy of silencing him with an illuminated manuscript. Tempting, but parchment is pricey and bird tantrums are apparently included in the Tudor bed and breakfast package. Joke number 1 arrives wearing feathers. If roosters are alarm clocks, this peacock is the entire snooze-resistant deluxe model. You sit up, blanket sliding to your waist, and feel a lingering glow where the warming pan once nested. The bed smells of faint lavender, smoke, and, curiously, thyme. The herb from last night's rushlights has migrated into the straw like gossip spreading at market. Outside, rain has stopped, replaced by soft mist that blurs the leaded panes. You breathe in the damp morning, and somewhere in the distance, a cow lowing sounds like a baritone hymn, ushering in a new round of devotions. Mainstream fact drop. By royal decree after the Act of Uniformity, every household is expected to recite morning prayer from the Book of Common Prayer, branding sunrise as the daily startup ritual long before operating systems stole the term. Your joints argue as you swing feet to floor. Remember those knee-locking psalms? But a fresh layer of rushes feels forgiving, scented today with mint. A servant raps lightly, delivers a basin of cool water, and retreats. You splash your face, noticing the basin's pewter rim is dented, possibly from generations of drowsy nobles colliding with medieval countertops. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Tudors believed adding a single drop of owl's tear to wash water kept wrinkles away. Historians still argue whether anyone actually harvested tears from disgruntled owls or if the whole notion was an Elizabethan inside joke that got wildly out of hand. You glance around, no owls, no tears, just minty water reflecting your bemused expression. Breakfast convenes in the lesser hall, a smaller chamber with timber ceiling low enough to make tall guests reevaluate their hat choices. Trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread, double as plates soaking up porridge so nobody has to wash bowls. You spoon barley porridge laced with honey and, unsurprisingly, another hint of lavender. Joke number 2 stirs itself into the bowl. Tudor cooks apparently got a bulk discount on lavender. You half expect the blacksmith to shoe horses with perfumed horseshoes next as you eat. Conversation drifts to today's tasks. Lady Margaret, rubbing those formidable eyebrows awake, mentions a planned visit to the family chapel. Word has spread that a relic, possibly St. Agatha's veil, rests behind the altar, wrapped in silk and cedar shavings. You perk up, remembering your half-asleep promise to investigate. The steward interjects a mainstream fact. Pilgrim badges from Canterbury remain popular souvenirs, proof that relic tourism was essentially the original merch table. Joke withheld. We've got a quota to manage. Breakfast ends with a final slurp of ale. Yes, ale at dawn, because Tudor water sometimes doubled as bacteria soup. You wipe your lips on linen and follow the household across a courtyard glistening with dew. Chickens scatter underfoot, flapping like startled thespians told there's a new script revision. The chapel stands apart from the manor, half-timber walls dressed in ivy. A squat tower wearing a weather vane shaped like a mermaid. That vane creaks lazily as mist curls around it, giving the illusion of a sea creature swimming through cloud. Inside, candlelight communes with stained glass, painting the aisle in jewel tones you recognize from last night's solar. The scent is part beeswax, part damp stone, with a top note of lingering incense. Kneelers line the altar rail, thick cushions stuffed with rags instead of straw, a luxury your knees applaud. Lady Margaret bows, and you mirror her, trying not to wobble. A brief prayer echoes through timber rafters, ending with the collective sign of the cross. Mainstream fact quietly threaded. Many chapels adopted the Sarum rite pre-Reformation, but by Elizabeth's reign, English liturgy tilted Protestant. Families like this balanced old ritual comfort with new-era compliance. Now comes the relic. The priest, an uncle on Lady Margaret's side, retrieves a wooden box carved with vines. He lifts the lid, revealing folded white silk, faintly yellowed. The atmosphere thickens with reverence, but your brain, still half comedic commentator, wonders if the veil ever enjoyed a Tudor laundry day. Joke number 3 flutters by. You resist asking whether the saint's delicate laundry tag read, "Wash on heavenly setting, tumble dry with prayers." The priest relates the legend. Saint Agatha, patron of nurses and hot coal survivors, supposedly pressed this veil to her wounds, and it miraculously cooled them. You lean closer, noting subtle blood-red embroidery that maybe, just maybe, is original. Historians still argue whether such provincial relics were authentic or clever ecclesiastical marketing. Some claim traveling monks sold saintly cloth by the yard, leaving parishes with relics more dubious than a street peddler's Rolex. Regardless, the veil feels precious in this filtered morning light, and everyone treats it like distilled holiness. After veneration, the relic returns to its cedar cocoon, and Lady Margaret invites you to explore the chapel's side aisle. There, worn wooden panels depict biblical scenes interwoven with local folklore. St. George again, but this time his lance stands tall. No droop, perhaps an artistic correction after last night's tired tapestry. A tiny carving below shows a mermaid handing him a jug. Historians still debate whether mermaids symbolized temptation or were simply medieval doodles gone mainstream. You chuckle softly, which draws a sideways glance from the steward, but it's fine. Reverence and humor can share pew space. While you admire carvings, a distant clatter erupts outside. Iron shoes on cobbles. The blacksmith leads a horse past the chapel door, singing a bawdy sea shanty with lyrics smoothed down to PG by missing syllables. Sunshine pierces the mist, scattering jewels of light across the nave. Lady Margaret excuses herself to manage household accounts, leaving you free to wander. You kneel again, partly to honor the space, partly to test those cushiony kneelers. Frankly, a revelation. Closing your eyes, you recall last night's segmented sleep, the thyme aromatics, the midnight oatcake. Your breath slows, syncing with birds chirping through open lancet windows. A sense of peace settles, until a gentle drip lands on your collar. Looking up, you see a roof leak tracing a path down a beam. Here's a quirky fringe detail. Some Tudor sealed gaps with a paste made from powdered eggshell and cow hair. You imagine applying farmhouse putty while perched on scaffolding, and another laugh escapes, though softly. Hours seem to relax, same as you. The manor's daily buzz resumes outside. Clattering pots, neighing horses, that indefatigable peacock auditioning again. Yet in the chapel, time feels syrupy, thick and sweet, holding each sound in amber. The Book of Hours flashes in your memory, those gilded margins, the scribbled complaints, and you realize rituals, relics, and doodled margins all share one purpose: giving restless human hearts a rhythm. Eventually you rise, stretch, and pass the carved mermaid vein on your way out. Sunshine now blankets the courtyard, warming damp flagstones. You pause, inhale air tinged with hay and chimney smoke, and plan your afternoon. Perhaps you'll watch the dairy-maid churn butter, maybe hunt the carpenter to pitch that lean-a-bed vertical sleeping device. You smirk. Innovation must start somewhere, even if it ends with a splintered prototype. For now, you pocket every sight, sound, and lavender-laced breath, storing them like tiny relics of your own. The day is young, the peacock persistent, and your knees, miracle of miracles, almost forgiving. With chapel peace still humming in your chest, you step back toward the manor, ready to chase the next gentle ritual, whatever mint-scented twist it brings. The sun climbs higher, tilting gold across the courtyard as you stride back to the great hall, boots scuffing rain-damp flagstones that still remember last night's downpour. Rooks will overhead, arguing in harsh caws, while you ponder a more personal debate: how to survive the yawning hours between now and the next knee-bruising prayer marathon. Above the manor door, that squeaky mermaid weathervane stretches in the breeze as if she too were limbering up for vespers. Inside, dinner preparations, that's the main midday meal, mainstream fact number one, clatter to a crescendo. Trestle boards slide into place, iron cauldrons hiss like dragons with sinus problems, and a riot of aromas: barley pottage, rosemary capon, mint-laced peas, twines through the rafters. Lady Margaret, ledger in hand, corners you for help counting the household's dwindling candle stash. You nod. Anything beats goose-plucking duty. Joke one taps your shoulder. Tudor accounting is CrossFit for introverts. Lift parchment, squat by the inkwell, repeat until pious. Quill scratch, wax seal stamp, and meanwhile a kitchen boy trots past balancing a platter of eels that shimmer like punctuation marks. He nearly collides with the dairy-maid's tower of clotted cream. Both freeze, wobble, perform a pirouette fit for Swan Lake. Crisis averted and comic timing flawless. The steward leans over to share a fringe tidbit. Eel skins, once dried, doubled as shoelaces when leather prices spiked. Historians still argue whether slippery laces were practical footwear or a fashion hazard that left half the gentry flat on their backs. You attempt to imagine eelskin sneakers and immediately regret it. Trumpet fanfare announces dinner. The peacock, mortally offended by competition, stalks off in a rustling fit, granting you 30 blessed seconds of silence, the longest stretch since dawn. You slide onto a bench beside the carpenter, future co-conspirator in ergonomic bedtime gear. Trencher bread sops up pottage while communal salt travels down the line like a celebrity guest. Mint outmuscles barley and joke 2 leaps from the bowl. At this rate you expect dessert to be lavender-flavored air served on a time-infused spoon. Conversation meanders. Last year's bad harvest, rumors of a Spanish fleet, Lady Margaret's upcoming charity quilt sale, stitched entirely with herbal sachets, naturally. Mid-bite, the carpenter describes a rickety staircase he longs to stabilize using adjustable iron screws. Something ye twist by hand. You nearly choke on capon. He's invented IKEA 3 centuries early. Joke 3 doodles itself. Ask him to include an Allen key, though you'll have to brand it the Mystic Hex Rod. Boards cleared, you slip outdoors. Noon prayer rings, a short psalm and collect. Mercifully gentle on your knees, which still remember yesterday's Latin marathon. Free hour secured, you wander behind the stables. Gardeners tend raised beds bursting with leeks, fennel, and yes, another universe of lavender. Old Will, the head gardener, breaks a clay pot, buries shards around lettuce roots, then whispers his secret weapon. Moonlight reflecting off pottery scares slugs. Historians still argue whether moon-powered pest control ever worked or if we'll simply enjoy smashing dishes after ale. You pocket a shard, partly as souvenir, partly as potential knee-pad prototype. Clouds herd together. Afternoon edges toward dusk. You duck into the scriptorium, where Lady Margaret's young cousin curses smudged ink. She shows you an illuminated capital of an owl crying into a wash basin, visual callback to that wrinkle-free face wash myth. You suggest adding lavender tears for authenticity. She snorts, blotting sand to dry the page. Supper. Light bread, cheese, and small beer. Passes quickly, then Compline beckons. Chapel cushions feel plusher tonight. Perhaps someone stuffed them with extra rags. The priest sings the Nunc Dimittis. You spot your pottery shard under the cushion, testing old Will's ergonomic theory. Miraculously, your knees approve. Household prayers return to the solar, Latin rolling like tide under candle glow. Your secret shard softens the strain, and you glimpse Lady Margaret raising one impressive eyebrow. Did she notice your newfound serenity? Penitential psalms glide on. Historians still argue whether these lengthy adawns sprang from genuine devotion or parental strategies to exhaust restless heirs. Either way, the final amen descends like a feather. Chamomile-scented rushlights guide everyone down corridors. A servant hands you warm milk laced with pricey nutmeg. A Tudor flex equal to streaming music through gold earbuds. The peacock, chastened, tucks head beneath wing. Even divas sleep. In your chamber, straw rustles hello. You prop the Book of Hours on the bedside stool, its gilded margin winking approval. Blankets redolent of lavender cocoon you. Knees thankful beneath shard-enhanced truce. Mind drifting toward dreams where eelskin shoelaces, mermaid veins, and moonlit slugs host a polite tea. Dreams have barely unspooled their first lavender-scented ribbon when the parish bell tolls midnight, plucking you from straw-rustled slumber like a minstrel yanking a lute string. Your eyes crack open to blackness so complete you momentarily suspect the candle guild is on strike. A single ember glows in the hearth, orange as a sleepy fox's eye, coaxing you upright for the inevitable intermission. Yes, it's segmented sleep o'clock again. Joke number 1 yawns beside you. Tudor nightlife is basically a pop-up event nobody RSVPs to but everyone attends. You grope for the rushlight, fingers brushing time-coded read. A quick spark, a cough of herbal smoke, and the corridor appears in shimmering halos. The warmth from your pottery shard-assisted knee pads lingers, so you shuffle down the passage with less of last night's tin soldier stiffness. Somewhere ahead, the peacock mutters disapproval at being cast as background percussion. You smile. Even divas need beauty rest in the Great Hall. A skeleton crew has gathered. The priest, 2 yawning scullery lads, and Lady Margaret wrapped in a cloak embroidered with, surprise, lavender sprigs. The group recites a brisk Psalm 134. Behold, bless ye the Lord. Its cadence soft as mist against the rafters. Mainstream fact slips in politely. Many Tudor households used this psalm for night vigils because it fit neatly into the balance between piety and practical yawning limits. When the final amen tapers off, Lady Margaret suggests star-watching while embers revive. Someone unlatches the oak door. Cold air barges in carrying scents of wet grass and distant chimney soot. You step into the courtyard where clouds have parted to reveal a spill of winter constellations. Orion strides overhead, sword glittering, and you remember the priest's passing comment yesterday. Sailors timed Atlantic crossings by these same lights. Historians still argue whether average manor folk could read star charts or simply pointed upward saying, "Looks nice tonight." Either way, you tilt your head back until straw prickles tumble from your hair like tiny meteors returning to Earth. Quirky tidbit time. The steward swears his grandmother cured insomnia by reciting star names backward, starting with Norio for Orion, until tongue-tied exhaustion guaranteed sleep. You test Igor, that's Roge from Roger's Star, a Tudor nickname for Beetlejuice. Feel ridiculous, but also oddly drowsy. Joke number 2 streaks across your thoughts. Tudor self-care, brought to you by accidental tongue yoga. A faint hiss draws you toward the dovecot. Inside, drowsy pigeons shuffle on wooden ledges, feathers puffed against the chill. One bird wears a tiny parchment tube on its leg. Courier service for the local magistrate. You recall yesterday's eelskin shoelace revelation and decide Tudor technology is basically birds, fish, and prayer powering the empire. Back in the hall, embers glow bold enough for oatcake reheating. A servant flips slices on an iron plate until edges crisp like early edition potato chips. You bite into one. Thyme and barley crumble together, and your stomach hums approval. Lady Margaret passes around warmed ale, lower alcohol, higher comfort factor. You raise the mug, catch your reflection in its surface, and nearly snort. The lighting makes your hair resemble a halo of straw. Joke number 3 sidles in. Congratulations, you're now patron saint of bedhead. Bellies satisfied, eyelids sagging, everyone disperses. You pad toward your chamber, the rushlight flickering helpful constellations across the plaster. Passing the library door, you notice a faint melody. Someone plucking a cittern. Curious, you poke your head in. The carpenter sits amid tool sketches, humming a lullaby about St. Agatha's Veil. He claims the tune loosens stubborn knots in oak. Historians still argue whether music truly seasoned timber or merely mellowed the craftsman. The thought of lullaby-infused furniture makes you chuckle. Perhaps your future lean-a-bed will arrive pre-serenaded. Finally, pallet time. Blankets greet you with residual chamomile fragrance. You tuck the shard cushion beneath protesting knees, grateful for old Will's moonslug trick repurposed as orthopedic innovation. The hearth ember has surrendered to ash, but your core is warm from ale and oat cake. Outside, rooks settle into inky silence. Even the peacock concedes defeat until dawn's next curtain call. You slide toward sleep, replaying constellations across the inside of your eyelids. Orion, Cassiopeia, the seven sisters, they drift like illuminated capitals in the sky's own book of hours. You wonder if future scholars will debate your straw halo anecdote or perhaps the authenticity of eel sneaker couture. Either way, you're content, knees cushioned, stomach cozy, tongue still tasting thyme and barley. Breath by breath, the manor fades into hush, the star names backward game unspooling into nonsense syllables that lull you deeper. Lavender, thyme, nutmeg, and wood smoke intertwine, forming a sleepy braid that anchors you firmly to Tudor midnight, exactly where you're meant to dream. Dawn creeps in like a bashful servant, sliding pastel ribbons under the door and prodding your eyelids from the inside. You surface slowly, greeted by the familiar perfume of lavender, straw, and last night's nutmeg. The peacock, evidently refreshed after its mandated vocal rest, issues a solo worthy of a Renaissance brass section. You bury your face in the blanket, contemplating whether St. Agatha's Veil might double as a bird-sized gag. Joke number 1 sighs beside you. Someone invent earplugs soon, or history's getting unfriended. You sit up and stretch, feeling pleasantly betrayed by your own comfort. Thanks to old Will's pottery shard knee pad, your joints declare a tentative truce. The fire has burned down to sleepy cinders, yet an obliging maid appears with a new warming pan. This one fashioned from beaten copper etched with mermaids that match the weather vane outside. She slips it under the straw and vanishes before you can mutter a bleary thanks. Mainstream fact floats in. Copper, pricier than brass, was favored for its heat-holding swagger among well-heeled Tudor families who wanted their beds to flex subtle wealth. You lace your boots, grateful the laces are sturdy leather, not yesterday's imagined eel skins. Buttoning a wool doublet, you catch your reflection in a wavy bit of mirror glass. Hair, haystack. Eyes, sleep-creased. Halo effect, sadly absent. You shrug. Saintly hairstyles are overrated, especially before breakfast. In the corridor, rushlights have retired, leaving gentle beams of sun to spotlight long-ignored cobwebs. You make a mental note to tip the housekeeper, perhaps with a sachet of lavender, since currency here is apparently measured in herbs. The lesser hall hums with activity. Cook stirs a cauldron of pottage while dictating a recipe to an apprentice who can't write and therefore draws symbolic onions in a wax tablet. A jug of small beer sits beside a bowl of stewed apples kissed with, you guessed it, mint. You accept a wooden spoon, savoring the warm, spiced concoction. Joke number 2 bubbles up. Congratulations, your palate has earned a loyalty card. 3 more mint hits and the chef will name a sheep after you. Between spoonfuls, the steward reads news delivered by carrier pigeon at dawn. According to the parchment, the Queen's Court considers a new tax on imported candles, apparently to discourage late-night reading among rebellious scholars. Historians still argue whether such candle levies actually dimmed study sessions or merely fattened smuggling rings glowing brighter than legitimate chandlers. You picture covert students huddled in cellars, candles cloaked like contraband bananas, and snicker into your porridge. After breakfast, Lady Margaret recruits you for a walk to the manor's tithe barn, where villagers deposit grain in lieu of cash rent. The path wanders through mist-kissed pasture, hooves squelching in mud settled by yesterday's rain. Carts creak under barley sacks, and you note how every few yards a stone cross rises from the hedgerow, waymarkers doubling as spiritual speed limit signs. Mainstream fact: late medieval parishes often placed these crosses to remind travelers to pray for safe passage. An early version of drive safe signs minus reflective paint. Inside the tithe barn, beams stretch overhead like the ribs of a sleeping dragon. Dust motes swirl in sun shafts, and the sweet odor of stored barley tickles your nostrils. While Lady Margaret chats with tenants about grain weights, you discover a stack of curious objects near the wall. Dried pig bladders half filled with warm water and sealed with twine. Quirky tidbit unlocked: these bladder bottles are winter hot packs slipped between sheets when copper pans are scarce. You squeeze one gently. It squelches like a deflated balloon animal auditioning for court jester. Joke number 3 pops. Note to self: never mix pig bladder bottles with peacock beaks. One puncture and bedtime turns into a squishy interpretive dance. Business concludes, and the party heads back, skirts and cloaks fluttering in a chill breeze that tastes faintly of chimney soot. On the way, the carpenter jogs up, cheeks pink, brandishing a rough sketch of your proposed Lena bed. The design features adjustable pegs and a sling made of hemp webbing. He explains that sleepers can rest while half-standing, to preserve devout posture twixt vigils. Historians still argue whether similar contraptions ever existed. Some monks allegedly dozed upright in choir stalls, but solid proof remains elusive. You grin, imagining tomorrow's product demo starring the peacock as skeptical focus group. Back at the manor, midday bells summon everyone for the main dinner. Trencher bread again, but today the cook presents pike in parsley sauce and a side of, drumroll, lavender-infused carrots. You chew thoughtfully, concluding the herb has colonized every edible surface like a leafy empire. Lady Margaret notes your expression and winks. Evidently, she also craves spice diversity. She confides that a traveling merchant promises exotic peppers next month if the Spanish don't intercept his ship. You whisper back that your taste buds are preemptively throwing a fiesta. Once plates are cleared, the priest offers a short homily on St. Luke, patron of physicians, citing the mainstream fact that Tudor medical texts were just beginning to embrace Galenic humoral theory blended with new anatomy charts from Vesalius. You nod along, remembering your niece's personal testimony concerning humors. Too much chilly phlegm equals creaky prayer sessions. The priest, meanwhile, produces a vial of rose honey tonic he swears balances bile. You politely decline. Straw and lavender already run their own pharmacy in your bloodstream. Afternoon slants and household members split to chores. You trail the dairy-maid toward the cow shed, intrigued by her earlier cough that sounded more dramatic than fatal. She demonstrates how she sings plain chant while churning to keep rhythm, claiming it fattens butter faster. Historians still argue whether sound vibrations influence dairy density or if singing merely wards off boredom thick enough to curdle cream. The butter does look glossy, so who are you to refute musical milk science? With daylight fading, preparations for evening prayers begin anew. You sneak to the garden, pocketing another moonlight slug pottery shard to reinforce your cushion army. Rooks gather on the chapel roof, feathers silhouetted like musical notes on a stave. You wonder if they're rehearsing for Compline. The air cools, and smoke unfurls from chimneys, curling above the mermaid vein. Inside the chapel, those indulgent cushions wait. You discreetly slide extra shards beneath, layering comfort like secret chapters in the Book of Hours. Latin chants lift, candles flicker. The priest introduces a newly copied hymn from the Low Countries, and its unfamiliar melody drifts among beams still scented of cedar from St. Agatha's reliquary box. A hush falls at the final chord. You rise, realizing you could almost enjoy these devotions now that your kneecaps aren't auditioning for martyrdom. Night folds across the manor. Servants dart, extinguishing torches. The blanket of dark tucks every corner. You retire to your chamber, placing pig bladder hot water bottle number 1 at your feet as a field test. It is surprisingly cozy, though the faint barnyard whiff may need lavender backup. Sliding under covers, you hear the peacock deliver one last muttered squawk. Possibly an endorsement, possibly jealousy that bladders get a cameo. Either way, you smile, warmed from toes to thoughts, and feel the day's collage. Mint carrots, star names, hemp slings, pig bladders, settle into orderly rows like verses in an eternal lullaby. Breath slows. Candles fade. Somewhere outside, Old will smashes another pot for slug security, no doubt giving the moon its nightly mirrored disco. You drift, knees cushioned, hot bladder humming, lavender conquering all, and behind your eyelids Orion's sword flickers again, an ancient night light guiding you deeper into Tudor dreams. Sometime in the small hours, a dream about moon-drunk slugs segues into a real, distinctly non-dreamy drip of cold water tapping your forehead. You bolt upright, nearly headbutting the sloped rafters, and discover the infamous chapel leak has migrated to your chamber. A rain shower, sneaky as a court spy, must have rolled in while you slept. The pig bladder hot water bottle, now tepid, wobbles away from your flailing feet with a squelch like a startled frog. Joke number 1 splashes down. Congratulations, you've invented the first Tudor waterbed, complete with complimentary roof leak. You drag the straw mattress a foot to the left, out of the drip zone, and wrap the blanket around your shoulders like a portable keep. Through the casement you glimpse dawn, only half considering the idea of showing up. Sky and earth blur in a misty blue that smells of chimney soot and wet hay. Somewhere down the corridor, the carpenter's mallet thumps a pre-dawn tattoo. He's clearly eager to unleash the prototype lean a bed before breakfast. You rub your eyes, promising both knees a signing bonus if they survive the test. A tap on the door. The maid appears, balancing a candle and a tray of warm ale flavored. Shock twist, with rosemary this time. She mutters that the cook is out of mint. You nearly applaud. At last, a palate plot twist. Mainstream fact drifts in with the steam. Ale served at breakfast kept households hydrated because its low alcohol killed waterborne nasties. A quotidian microbiology hack long before microscopes became dinner party conversation. Downstairs, the great hall bustles like a beehive with a new queen. Everyone wants a peek at the carpenter's invention. 2 trestles support a tilted oak plank fitted with adjustable pegs and a broad hemp sling. The carpenter pats it proudly. One may pray, doze, or daydream upright, he proclaims, and step away without knees grown stiffer in last winter's boiled pudding. You exchange a look with Lady Margaret, equal parts hope and impending comedy. First, the priest volunteers to test it. At 60-something, he's got investment-grade creaky joints. He straps in, folds arms, and begins the opening lines of Psalm 23. At verse 3, a peg slips, dropping him 2 inches with a wooden grunt. The hall gasps. The priest keeps praying, eyes wide, voice unchanged, a true professional. Joke number 2 winks. If gravity can't interrupt Psalm 23, nothing can. Peg resecured, your turn arrives. You step into the sling, settle your back against oak, and find the angle surprisingly comfortable. Knees bent just enough to avoid mutiny. Latin chant from last night whispers in memory. You hum a bar or two and realize you could absolutely nap like this, suspended midair like an ecclesiastical hammock. A quirky tidbit surfaces via the steward. Some medieval night watchman slept standing while leaning against spears to keep armor from denting. Historians still argue whether they actually slept or merely perfected the art of open-eyed dozing to dodge reprimand. Either way, you're channeling their energy right now. Lady Margaret claps gently, declaring the prototype fit for further trials. The carpenter bows, beams, and whispers that version 2 will include cup holders for warm ale. You give him a conspiratorial thumbs up, imagining future YouTube sponsorships. This episode of Boring History for Sleep brought to you by Lean a Bed, because horizontal is overrated. Joke number 3 tiptoes in wearing a hemp sling. Breakfast features barley bread, soft cheese, and, for spice always finds a way, rosemary honey. You chew while the rain lifts and sunlight spears through window glass, igniting moat storms that dance like golden midges. Conversation turns to medicine, prompted by the priest rubbing his lower back after plank duty. Lady Margaret produces a pamphlet recently arrived from London touting New Anatomies after Vesalius, with woodcuts of muscles most curious. Mainstream fact, by the 1570s, translated anatomy texts were filtering beyond universities, feeding both surgeon skills and dinner table nightmares. You flip through sketches of flayed figures politely holding their own skin like overcoats and decide breakfast cheese can wait. The dairy maid peers over your shoulder, shrugs, and says she's seen worse on hog butchering day. Somehow that makes it better. A drizzle of rosemary honey revives your appetite. Herbs heal by taste if not by humoral science. Sun climbs, drying puddles, and Lady Margaret assigns you to help inspect the roof. The leek's declaration of war cannot stand. You ascend a ladder that sways like a drunk court jester, boots slipping on slick rungs. Up top, the view swallows breath. Mist curls across fields like rolling parchment. Rooks wheeze overhead. The mermaid weathervane squeaks, "Good morning." You spot the culprit, one misshapen slate shifted aside by wind. While the carpenter wedges it back, you notice tiny tufts of moss forming a mini-garden. Quirky detail. Some apothecaries harvested roof moss for salves said to draw out splinters. Historians still argue whether the moss mattered or the bandage did all the work. Your knees plan to test the theory should lean a bed backfire. Roof secured, you descend with legs jelly soft, but triumph warms you better than any pig bladder bottle. The manor's noontime dinner unfurls. Rabbit stew, spiced with hallelujah, juniper instead of lavender. Lady Margaret notices your grin and chuckles that change, like taxes, must arrive eventually. During the meal, the steward reads a second pigeon dispatch. Rumors swirl that playwrights in London are drafting comedies poking fun at country gentry's obsession with herbs. You glance at the table's rosemary centerpiece and snort. Self-awareness, Tudor style. Afternoon brings a tapestry-mending session in the solar. You help sort dyed threads while Lady Margaret recounts how the droopy lance St. George panel grew wobbly after last year's humidity. Mainstream fact: wool warp threads can stretch up to 10% when damp, a headache for weavers and a gift for historians seeking clues about household microclimates. You knot burgundy wool, recalling that very lance from your first night. Continuity stitched literally. As daylight fades, Vespers calls. Cushions feel heavenly. Your pottery shards and the new Lena bed stand by for backup. The priest, buoyed by his earlier near-plank experience, delivers a brisk homily on perseverance. He cites job, but you suspect he's really congratulating everyone on roof repair. Candles hiss, psalms flow, and when the final amen drifts upward, even the peacock remains respectfully mute. Perhaps stunned by the day's productivity, twilight thickens to velvet. Supper, bread trencher now soaked in stew remnants, disappears in companionable silence. You retire early, though not before placing a piece of roof moss in a rag beside the bed, just in case splinters dare tomorrow. Pig bladder bottle number 2, upgraded with lavender sprig garnish, some habits die hard. Tucks near your feet. The roof above, newly watertight, no longer taps soggy Morse code on your skull. You lie back, knees whispering gratitude, and replay the day. A standing hammock that almost baptized a priest, medical woodcuts upstaging cheese, moss bandages auditioning for duty. Each memory folds into mental origami, precise corners softened by candle glow. Breath slows. Heartbeat syncs with distant rooks settling into trees. You picture Orion again, now hidden by clouds but vivid in recall, and imagine pinning the Lena bed between his belt stars for safekeeping. Sleep curls around you like hemp sling and wool blanket combined, and Tudor night hush returns. Roof dry, knees comfy, jokes spent, dreams brewing. You wake before the peacock does, a rare victory that feels almost scandalous. Dawn's first breath slips through the unleaky roof and kisses the rafters rose gold, illuminating the pig bladder bottle still snug at your toes. It's tepid now, but you savor the gentle weight, a reminder that last night's engineering triumphs extended beyond moss caulking and priest-proof Lena beds. Sitting up, you inhale lavender, of course, and also the sharper scent of juniper from yesterday's rabbit stew creeping back for a curtain call. Joke number 1 stretches. If leftovers could talk, this juniper rabbit would be lobbying for a fan sequel. Down the corridor, servants shuffle with the soft clack of wooden pattens on rush-strewn floors. You join them, passing the new Lena bed parked against the wall like a decommissioned siege engine. A stable boy strokes the hemp sling as though it might whinny. Innovation inspires odd loyalties. In the lesser hall, breakfast waits. Rye bread, smoked herring, and, plot twist, no herbs at all, just a pat of plain butter singing its dairy solo. The cook grins mischievously, declaring it herbless fast day. mostly because the mint barrel finally ran dry. You chew reverently, mentally awarding this butter a knighthood. Conversation veers to apparel. Lady Margaret examines your doublet, suggests adding embroidery for the upcoming Michaelmas fair, and reminds everyone of the latest sumptuary edict. Only nobles of rank may wear silk on sleeves, a mainstream historical fact that kept tailors busy inventing loopholes. Joke number 2 buttons itself. Perhaps you'll embroider a tiny silk peacock, technically bird, not sleeve, then argue semantics if the fashion police arrive. Breakfast over, the household fans out. Your assignment: accompany the steward to the grain mill to verify the manor's tithe shares, because apparently nothing screams adventure like flour spreadsheets, 16th century edition. The mill perches beside a stream, its water wheel thumping a steady boom swish that echoes through your ribs. Inside, flour dust pirouettes in sunbeams, coating everything in ghostly white, including your eyebrows. Instant disguise should you ever need to impersonate a snowdrift. The miller greets you with a grin missing 2 incisors, occupational hazard of hard bread, and explains the miller's toll, his legal right to scoop a handful from every sack. Historians still argue whether millers abused this privilege or merely became convenient villains for folk songs. You decide his generous smile leans hero, not highwayman. While the steward scribbles tallies, you wander to the grindstone where a wooden hopper rattles like a tired tambourine. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some millers sprinkled poppy seeds into the grain to lubricate the stones and, according to legend, bestowed pleasantly drowsy bread on the parish. You picture the manor at prayer time, half dozing on poppy loaves, and chuckle aloud. The miller hears, winks, and slips you a linen pouch of the seeds. For your herbal crusade, he teases. Oh, if only he knew. Grain business concluded, you trek back under a sky ripening to cobalt. The road winds past hedges heavy with blackberries. You pluck a few, juice staining your fingertips royal purple. Joke number 3 pops. Commemorative ink for the next book of hours margin note. Dear future historians, send coffee. Ahead, the manor emerges, chimneys exhaling thin white threads that dissolve before reaching the rook's perch. Lunch. Technically dinner again. Features mutton pottage thickened with barley and enlivened by sage. Close enough to herbless, you suppose. Lady Margaret announces that the Michaelmas Fair organizers have requested musicians, so the carpenter volunteers his lullaby-grade cittern, and, in a moment of audacious generosity, volunteers you to read aloud a new morality play. You sputter into your pottage, but she insists your voice carries pleasantly when not muffled by straw. Mainstream fact cameo. Morality plays, still popular though slowly giving way to flashier stagecraft. Used allegorical characters like everyman to preach virtue between marketplace bargains. You're now on the cast list as Temperance, which feels optimistic given your nightly ale intake. Afternoon drifts toward a slate-colored dusk. The priest huddles over the Lena bed, attaching a small brass hook destined to hold a candle version 2 cup holder still forthcoming. You test the device standing before the chapel door, candle flickering inches from your ear, and recite part of Temperance's monologue. The acoustics send your voice swirling off carved beams. Even the rooks pause, perhaps debating a talent agent's side hustle. Before Vespers, Lady Margaret orders the household to the orchard for apple gleaning. Trees sag with red gold spheres, and the air tastes like syrup. You climb a ladder, mindful of Lena bed train balance, and drop apples into a collecting sheet. A giggling maid reveals another quirky tidbit. Some folk claim rubbing an apple on one's forehead while reciting the Lord's Prayer ensures a sweet dream. Historians still argue whether that's pious superstition or early aromatherapy, but you pocket a perfect orb for tonight's experiment. The bell calls, prayers resume. Kneeling cushions layered with secret pottery shards await, yet the priest invites you to stand in the Lena bed. Let temperance show us fortitude. Suspended at your gentle slant, you join the psalm responses, knees singing hallelujahs of relief. Joke withheld. Reverence, for once, clutches center stage. Candlelight gilds St. George's newly undrooped lance, and sunlight fading through stained glass bleeds crimson onto the floorboards. Compline closes, and the manor dims. After a light supper of cheese, apples, and yes, sage honey wafers, You retreat with your forehead-bound apple ready. The pig bladder bottle hums at your feet like a plump cat. The roof holds firm, moss bandage doing its mossy duty. You rub the apple across your brow, murmur the prayer, and place it beside the Book of Hours, which now sports a blackberry ink margin reading, "Remember the poppies. Sleep sidles close, lured by apple perfume, sage aftertaste, and the faint creak of lean beds settling in the corridor." You list victories, dry roof, herb diversity, joint-friendly furniture, and feel history itself smile in approval. Outside, the peacock emits a single, restrained chirp as if acknowledging a day well played, then falls silent. Clouds part. Orion unsheathes his familiar sword, glinting between chimney stacks. You watch until eyelids droop, picturing Temperance delivering flawless lines at the fair, Rooks as backup chorus, Miller selling poppy loaves to agreeable audiences. Lulled by apple-scented breath and straw's whispering rustle, you drift, ready for whatever sweet dreams Tudor folklore promised. Secure in the knowledge that tomorrow's prayers will find your knees prepared, your jokes primed, and your herb palate ever curious. Morning announces itself with a citrus-bright sunbeam that slides through the casement and lands squarely on the apple you blessed last night. The fruit gleams as if auditioning for a stained-glass cameo, and you take a ceremonial bite to test the folklore. Result: crisp, sweet, and, much to your sleepy delight, no lurking mint. You chew thoughtfully while thinking, well, forehead rubbing tastes successful, though double-blind studies remain pending. Joke number 1 stretches awake. Congrats, you've become an one-person clinical trial powered by Produce. Downstairs, the lesser hall vibrates with rehearsal energy for the upcoming Michaelmas Fair. The carpenter is tuning his cittern, plucking strings that twang like argumentative bees, while the dairy-maid practices plain-chant scales between butter churns. Lady Margaret waves you over and assigns costume duty. A chest yawns open to reveal bolts of homespun wool, a remnant of crimson velvet, and 3 scandalously small scraps of actual silk. Sleeve illegal for most, remember? Mainstream fact steps in. Tudor sumptuary laws find commoners who flaunted silk or velvet, funneling extra cash to the crown's wardrobe and feeding gossip mills wider than the Thames. Your task is to stitch symbolic temperance stripes down your doublet without attracting the Queen's fashion inspectors. You thread a bone needle and start sewing. To camouflage the velvet, you place it only on the interior seams. Luxury for your ribs, invisibility for the law. As you work, the steward strolls by reciting lines from another morality character, Prodigality, with relish that suggests he's typecast. He pauses to share a newspaper-style tidbit. Rumor claims a London bookseller will sell printed programs at the fair, hot off the press. Historians still argue whether early playbills actually circulated this far from the capital or if merchants simply hawked any scrap of print to overexcited country crowds. Either way, you picture your name in black letter and accidentally prick a finger. You dab the drop of blood with a linen scrap that smells faintly of sage wafers. The dairy maid looks over and offers a butter poultice, apparently her cure-all for needle mishaps. Joke number 2 churns up. If butter fixes wounds, England's future Red Cross may require a dairy herd. You decline politely, trust in basic clotting, and keep stitching. Costumes finished, the group heads outdoors for blocking practice. The courtyard becomes an impromptu stage. Rooks gather on the guttering like restless critics. You step into the role of Temperance and deliver your first speech, reminding Prodigality that virtue outlasts empty purses. Your voice carries, echoing off stone like it did in Lena Bed trials. The priest, acting as director, nods sagely and suggests you project even more come fair day, because the audience will include livestock, hawkers, and at least one screaming toddler demanding candied almonds. Mainstream fact cameo: Tudor fairs doubled as shopping sprees for sugar candies, a luxury newly imported through Portuguese routes that kept dentists in speculative daydreams. After rehearsal, Lady Margaret dispatches you and the carpenter to town for supplies. Ribbon, fresh candles, tax notwithstanding, and extra hemp for Lena Bed Mark II's headrest. The road curves through hedgerows laced with spider silk that flashes silver in the sun. Partway, you encounter a peddler cart loaded with penny chapbooks, thin pamphlets bearing woodcut covers of dragons, saints, or occasionally dragons punching saints. You buy one titled The Melancholy Goose of Michaelmas. Partly for research, partly for the exquisite absurdity. Quirky tidbit appears as the peddler confides. Some folks plant goose feathers in gardens believing they grow into quills by spring. Historians still argue whether anyone really expected a feather to sprout script supplies or if the tale was satire that got lost in translation. Town buzzes louder than a beehive in harvest weather. You pass a tavern advertising ale with a Spanish kick, likely code for contraband sherry. Joke number 3 tips its hat. Nothing shouts patriotism like smuggling your rival's booze. At the mercer's stall you secure ribbons dyed woad blue, a color bright enough to pop, but plain enough to stay within sumptuary safety margins. Next, the chandler weighs out candles, grumbling about new taxes and muttering that black market tallow will soon be cheaper than mutton fat. You pay extra for a lavender-scented taper, old habits, then hustle back before the peddler's goose starts narrating your chapbook aloud. Approaching the manor, you spot Old Will perched on a ladder, painting the mermaid vein with leftover woad for festive flair. The peacock struts beneath, offended by the color competition. Its tail snaps open, pure iridescent rebuttal, while Will mutters encouragement to the vain. Show him who's pretty. You shake your head, deciding that vanity feuds transcend species and centuries. Inside, dinner simmers. Pigeon pie laced with a modest sprinkle of thyme, for the herb barrel has not stayed empty long. The cook brags about her new supplier, a traveling Benedictine with an herb cart, bigger than Noah's Ark, dear. During the meal, the priest unveils another pamphlet, this one an anatomical guide to the melancholy spleen. You suspect printers are milking sorrow for sales, but the woodcuts are compelling in a mildly horrifying way. After dishes, the carpenter unveils Lena Bed Mark II, now with padded headrest and that promised candle hook. You test it in the chapel while the rooks settle above. Suspended comfortably, you practice your lines until twilight tilts violet outside the stained glass. Candlelight strokes St. George's lance. No droop these days, thanks to roof repairs, and flickers across the reliquary box. You wonder if St. Agatha approves of theatrical virtue. Surely she roots for temperance. Vespers flows like warm ale. Your knees rejoice, plank free. The priest includes a special prayer for those who travel to fairs, that their coin purses survive temptation. You secretly touch the hidden velvet seam in your costume, aware that temptation sometimes wears crimson lining. Candle grease drips softly, mimicking rain minus the roof leak trauma, and you feel a hush wrap the chapel like wool. Night slides in, cool and apple-scented. After a bread and blackberry supper, you retreat to your chamber, where the pig bladder bottle awaits, freshly filled and scented, mercifully, with juniper this time. You set tonight's reading material, The Melancholy Goose of Michaelmas, beside the Book of Hours and note that its dragon-punching woodcut already peeks from under the cover, eager for attention. Moonlight brushes the dry moss still drying on a windowsill. Soon you may craft it into a salve, should needle pokes escalate. Blankets gather, straw sighs, and your eyelids grow heavy. Before surrendering to sleep, you whisper Temperance's opening line one more time, letting the words float toward beams blackened by centuries of smoke. The manor seems to listen. Even the peacock grants a respectful hush, perhaps rehearsing its own cameo as allegory of pride. You smile into the darkness, aware that tomorrow brings more stitches, more psalms, and maybe, if poppy seed luck holds, a town crier trumpeting your name in printed ink. With that pleasant thought, you tuck the chapbook beneath your pillow for dream fuel and drift into a realm where geese philosophize, Lena beds multiply, and your velvet seems shimmer safely beyond sumptuary suspicion. The morning sun peeks shyly through the lattice windows, casting a patchwork of honey-gold light across the chamber where you've spent many a night kneeling, dreaming, and occasionally plotting tomorrow's herbal experiments. Lavender and rosemary still linger in the air, a fragrant reminder that in this manner the pillow menu features only floral or extra floral. You stretch, feeling the familiar ache in your knees, now dulled by pottery shard padding and the Lena bed's gentle mercy, and mutter joke number 1. If Tudor Fitbit existed, it would register 10,000 devotional lunges. Below stairs, the household crackles with anticipation for the Michaelmas fair. The cook's cauldrons burble like caffeinated geysers while the carpenter polishes the Lena bed prototype as though it might take first prize in the livestock category. Lady Margaret drafts you into decoration duty, so you weave garlands from dried lavender, thyme, and one sprig of rosemary that keeps springing back upright, as if auditioning for Best Supporting Herb. While threading stems, you overhear the steward recounting fresh London gossip. A brand new comedy lampoons country gentry for believing cows predict weather and lavender cures heartbreak. Historians still argue whether such satirical plays toured beyond London playhouses or stayed city-bound where the jokes about rural sniffers landed best. Joke number 2 dangles. You secretly hope the playwright visits and discovers your Lena bed. Nothing says sophistication like dozing vertically. Hours flutter by to a soundtrack of rooks clattering overhead and a startling absence of peacock shrieks. He's apparently observing a courtesy silence for fair prep. You pause to admire the local weaver's latest tapestry. St. George, lance proudly undrooped, shaking hands with a mermaid beneath a woad blue sky. A quirky tidbit surfaces. The weaver insists the mermaid represents maritime humility, though you suspect she just likes fish with good hair. Evening drapes the manor in amber. Compline gathers the household beneath cedar-scented beams. Cushions feel cloud-soft, fresh rushes plus extra pottery shards form a knee spa that would bankrupt modern-day spas. The priest's voice rolls through Psalm 91. You sway, half-lulled, half-calculating garland lengths left to finish. The Lena bed stands sentinel nearby, candle hook gleaming like a miniature halo. When the final amen settles, you close your eyes and let the herb-tinged hush cradle you. Tomorrow holds ribbon stalls, morality plays, and at least 3 new ways to risk splinters. But for now you sink into the manor's nocturnal heartbeat. Joke number 3 tiptoes in, if lavender were currency, you'd already be the richest sleeper in Christendom. With that, you inhale rosemary, exhale every rehearsal worry, and drift toward dreams stitched in purple and thyme. Dawn bursts open like a stage curtain, and the entire manor, people, livestock, even that ornery peacock, knows it is Michaelmas fair day. You wake before the bell, heart pattering faster than a cittern tremolo, but knees only grumble mildly thanks to yesterday's deluxe cushion cocktail. As you toss back the blanket, a stray garland petal pirouettes to the floor. Rosemary still performing encores, apparently. You grin, then joke number 1 yawns beside you. Who needs coffee when your to-do list can double as cardio? A maid appears with wash water and news. The road into town already clogs with carts bearing geese, ribbons, and one rumored dancing bear wearing, she whispers, a codpiece. You arch an eyebrow. Even Tudor bears respect sumptuary laws, it seems. While splashing your face, you recall a mainstream fact Lady Margaret mentioned last night. Michaelmas geese were traditionally roasted to ensure prosperity through the coming winter, a ritual that made poultry decidedly nervous each September. Downstairs, breakfast is a blur of rye bread and honey, a merciful herb hiatus, before everyone assembles in the courtyard. The Lena bed, now strapped to a handcart like a traveling saint's reliquary, gleams under a drapery of lavender garlands. The carpenter fusses with its candle hook, polishing until you can almost see your apprehensive reflection. Lady Margaret distributes tiny nosegays of sage and thyme to keep fairground odors civil, which translates to Tudor Febreze. You tuck yours into your sleeve. Invisible silk seems still our little secret. The procession sets off, boots crunching gravel while rooks flit overhead shouting their version of good luck. Half a mile down the lane, the peacock surprises everyone by joining the parade, tail fanned in egotistical glory. Children from nearby cottages squeal, and you feel a pang of stage fright. Apparently the bird insists on a cameo in your morality play. Joke number 2 struts in. Nothing like avian paparazzi to elevate a rural production's press profile. Approaching town, you pass fields where farmers finish the last of the harvest. A plowman raises a straw-capped head to wish you prosperous trades, then returns to coax oxen through loamy furrows. The steward murmurs a quirky tidbit, that some folk predict winter's severity by slicing open a goose bone and reading its marrow stripes like weather runes. Historians still argue whether this avian augury ever outforecast an aching hip, but you vow to inspect your supper goose out of sheer scientific responsibility. At the town gate, trumpeters announce arrivals, and your group merges into a dazzling muddle of stalls selling everything from pewter spoons to milagro charms shaped like, yes, lavender sprigs. The mingled scents, pitch, roasting nuts, horse sweat, shove aside your time nosegays modest defense. You lead the cart to the performance green where a makeshift stage of oak planks perches atop ale barrels. The priest declares it sturdy. The carpenter taps a board and mutters about future Lena stage possibilities. Rehearsal lasts 2 chaotic rounds. First interrupted by a goat escaping a ribbon vendor. Second interrupted by the dancing bears practice jig that rattles the barrels until St. George's tapestry backdrop threatens to drape the bass drum. Yet by noon, lines flow smoother than small beer. You slip backstage to watch hawkers hawk. Saffron buns at tuppence. Spanish oranges at any price you dare. An elderly woman reads palms, tracing rosemary oil on wrists to reveal fates. She pauses at your pulse, predicting vertical dreams and distant ink. You blink. Lena bed and rumored printed programs? Either she's clairvoyant or the peacock has leaked your PR script at mid-afternoon. Bells chime for the first performance. Sunlight dazzles banners. A hush settles. Then you stride on stage as Temperance, clad in your discreet velvet-lined doublet, silk hidden but confidence blazing. Your opening monologue rings across the crowd, bouncing off the ale barrels and landing in eager ears. You glimpse the peacock perched atop a booth roof, tail shimmering like an opulent exclamation mark. Joke number 3 glides through your mind. Should the play flop, at least the set decoration will strut home proud. Prodigality enters, purse jangling, boasting of lavender-scented feasts, callback, and eelskin laces. At the cue, Lena bed is wheeled on to demonstrate righteous posture. The priest, playing moderation, seats himself in the sling, chanting a verse so solemn it hushes even the bear handler. A collective ooh sweeps the fairground. You spy whispering clothiers already plotting knockoffs. Historians still argue whether such gadgets ever gained commercial traction outside monasteries, but today's spectators look ready to pre-order. Final scene. You, Temperance, stand tall, well, slightly slanted, and urge the audience to shun waste, honor thrift, and remember knees exist tomorrow. Applause erupts, punctuated by the bear's accidental roar which, frankly, enhances the encore. Rooks will overhead, cawing like rowdy critics, and the peacock bows theatrically, stealing your curtain call. You don't mind. Virtue, after all, cultivates humility. After the show, a London printer's apprentice indeed appears with stack of crude playbills. Your name, misspelled Temperance, still gleams in black letter. You tuck one behind your girdle as evidence for future time travel bragging rights. Lady Margaret secures 2 orders for Lena beds from neighboring gentry who complain of chronic vesper knee. And the carpenter practically levitates. Evening paints the sky apricot. You barter blackberry-stained ribbons for a wedge of candied ginger, a palate-cleansing marvel that tastes like spicy lightning. Mainstream fact slides in ginger, imported via Levantine merchants, cost fortunes a few decades ago but now trickles into fairs, signifying England's expanding trade webs. You savor each nibble, silently toasting maritime maps. At tea twilight, the goose auction begins. Bidders circle crates while geese honk protest. The steward buys a plump specimen, bone divination potential gleaming in his eyes. You scratch a note to self, borrow a knife, test the marrow forecast, and compare to moss-based weather intuition. Data science, Tudor edition. Procession home trails under a velvet sky. The peacock rides on the cart like a reigning monarch. Lena bed's garlands sway, shedding lavender into the dust. You arrive at the manor bone-weary but exhilarated, voice sandpapered by speeches and laughter. Supper is roasted goose glazed in surprise sage butter. You carve, study the stripped bone. Pale, streak-free, promising a mild winter if folklore holds. Historians still argue whether such readings influenced crop planning, but you choose optimism and an extra dollop of sauce. Compline chants drift softer tonight, everyone's lungs spent from cheering. Cushions and shards welcome your knees once more, yet you feel lighter, buoyed by applause echoes and ginger heat lingering on your tongue. The pig bladder bottle waits in your chamber, infused with nettle this time, experiment or prank, you're unsure. You slide it to your feet, its warmth engulfing toes grateful after hours in buckle shoes. On the stool, the misspelled playbill curls like a sleepy cat. You smooth it, smile, and tuck behind the book of hours where Lady Margaret's margin jokes keep it good company. Before sleep takes you, you replay the day. Theatrics, trade, silk slipping past laws, a prophecy about vertical dreams. Outside, Orion steadies his sword, perhaps impressed by your temperate triumph. The manor breathes lavender once more, mingled now with faint ginger and roasted goose memory. You exhale, knees humming amen, and drift into a well-earned slumber where codpiece bears tap dance. Lena beds fly off shelves, and rooks write reviews in BlackBerry ink that always spell your name correctly. Sleep clings to you like a warm wool cloak when dawn pads in on muffled paws. The manor feels hushed, as though every rafter still savors yesterday's laughter, and even the peacock only manages a croaky gargle before turning over. If birds could turn over. You sit up, knees registering a polite present, rather than a mutiny, proof that pottery shard engineering and Lena-bed physics are quietly rewriting Tudor orthopedics. Joke number 1 rubs its eyes. Somewhere, an enterprising monk is sketching pilgrim points for cushioning indulgences. You swing your feet to the rush-strewn floor and discover lavender petals caught between your toes. Souvenirs from the garlands that draped yesterday's cart. A corner of the misspelled playbill peeks out from beneath the pillow. Temperance, forever lacking an E, but still basking in its brief brush with fame. You tuck it into your doublet and shuffle toward breakfast, guided by a mingled scent of juniper ash and fresh-baked oat loaves and the lesser hall. The cook has declared a palate reset. Plain rye bread, sweet butter, and small beer untouched by any herb except the barley it was born from. Everyone eats with the reverence usually reserved for relics. Lady Margaret joins you, eyes sparkling like a newly polished pewter cup. She spreads a slender packet on the table, parchment tied with woad blue thread, and announces a delivery from her cousin in London. The latest herbal compendium by a Dr. Gerard, still warm from the press. Mainstream fact breezes in. Printed herbals are changing kitchen gardens across England, replacing hearsay with woodcut illustrations so crisp you can almost smell the ink. You untie the thread, open the book, and inhale a bouquet of fresh type, timber pulp, and ambition. Inked vines crawl across each page, wrapping around Latin names you can almost pronounce before breakfast. A water lily woodcut reminds you of yesterday's prophetic palm reader whispering vertical dreams, and your grin widens. Flipping farther, you land on a remedy for aching joints. Crushed nettle leaves mixed with goose fat, applied twice daily. You raise an eyebrow, goose again, but different application. A quirky tidbit blossoms. Dr. Gerard notes that some Swabian farmers swear by nettle whippings to cure lethargy, an energy drink in botanical disguise. Lady Margaret suggests field testing the ointment on the manor's oldest hound, who limps like a three-legged stool. Historians still argue whether nettle cures actually soothed pain or merely distracted patients by stinging elsewhere. You propose trying it on your own knees first. Controlled trials begin at home, after all. Joke number 2 waves a stethoscope. Take 2 nettle slaps and call me when the Latin clears up. Mid-morning finds you in the herb garden, gathering ingredients under old Will's amused gaze. Dew beads glint on mint leaves, but the nettles you need lurk farther back, radiating spite. You pinch a pear with 2 sticks, tweezer style, and drop them into a mortar. Goose fat comes courtesy of last night's roast. The steward approves recycling. You grind the mixture until it resembles swamp pesto, then dab a pea-sized glob onto your left knee. The sting pricks like a gossip's needle, but warmth follows, soothing in a strange hurts-so-good fashion. You hum psalm tones as placebo accompaniment. While the ointment settles, you help Will transplant rosemary cuttings beside the apothecary roses. He shares a superstition. Planting rosemary by the doorstep keeps thieves away because, he claims, it confuses their sense of smell and direction. Historians still argue whether burglars fear fragrant labyrinths or if homeowners simply like aromatic excuses to showcase gardening prowess. Either way, you tuck the story away for a future play. Perhaps Rosemary the Gatekeeper could steal the next fair's spotlight. Noon bells chime, but instead of a full dinner, the household opts for a post-fair fast. Really just modest portions to let bruised purses convalesce. Lentil pottage simmers with nothing costlier than onion. The priest thanks Providence for prudent economies, then winks at you, clearly recalling yesterday's goose marrow meteorology. Joke number 3 surfaces. You wonder if lentil bones can forecast anything or just pass silently in the night. After the meal, Lady Margaret asks you to catalogue the new herbal against the manor's existing remedies. You perch in the solar, sunlight striping the trestle table, comparing Gerard's Latin to margin notes in the household's dog-eared physiques for ordinary folk. A pattern emerges. Half the new cures are déjà vu with better illustrations. The other half call for ingredients like unicorn horn, hastily crossed out by a later hand. You note that earlier we used peacock feathers only for drama, not decoctions. Progress indeed. Your knees, meanwhile, feel oddly spry, nettle heat pulsing under wool like a discreet forge. Encouraged, you stride down the corridor to visit the chapel. Lean a bed Mark II in tow. Candle hook, padded headrest, cup holder, every upgrade gleams. You set it up before the altar and kneel briefly in thanks. On the cushion, not shards, because scientific honesty demands control variables. Relief flows through joints with a whispered hallelujah. You imagine St. George giving a subtle thumbs up behind that resolute lance. Evening shadow stretches. Vespers beckons. The household gathers, some sporting tiny nettle leaf badges in solidarity. When the priest intones the opening versicle, you take position in the lean-a-bed, balancing a beeswax candle in its hook. Lady Margaret's eyes flicker approval. Innovation married to ritual at last. As the psalm refrain rises, you spot the peacock perched on the rude screen, tail furled into respectful apricot. Perhaps he senses that tonight's melody is gentler, suffused with fair afterglow and fresh botanical intrigue. Between prayers, the priest delivers a brief discourse on St. Luke's medicinal miracles, noting that early Christian physicians often balanced spiritual and herbal therapies. Historians still debate whether Luke truly practiced medicine or functioned more as gospel chronicler with a first aid kit, but the story fits the evening's theme like rosemary at a doorway. You file it away for tomorrow's margin note, maybe beside the blackberry ink plea for coffee. Compline drifts into hush. Rushlights guide you to the great hall, where the carpenter is doodling a portable lean-a-stool for travelers who desire devotion on the go. You pat his shoulder, startup fever is catching. Outside, the manor exhales cool night air. Stars glitter pristine after the fairground smoke has drifted off toward the next village gossip. Back in your chamber, you smear a second layer of nettle balm on the right knee, scientific symmetry, and slip the pig bladder bottle beneath the covers, this time filled with lemon balm tea leftover from the cook's evening brew. Steam fogs the tethered bladder like a miniature weather globe predicting clear skies. You slide under wool, bones humming satisfaction, and pull Gerard's herbal onto your lap for a few more pages. Woodcuts of marigold, horehound, and something called sleepwort wink at you. If only sleepwort were stocked in the garden. But lavender will do, as always. Candlelight dims, your eyelids follow. In the distance, the chapel bell marks the hour, its tone mellow as pear cider. You whisper a final amen. Taste faint nettle on your lips, notes of spinach smeared with daring, and let dreams unfurl. The first tableau features a dancing bear in a lean-a-stool, Dr. Gerard autographing nettle leaves, and the peacock reading your corrected playbill with theatrical flourish. You smile in your sleep, convinced that tomorrow's prayers will be less tiring, the herb barrels more diverse, and the joke still politely queued at the manor's door, waiting to kneel beside you. Morning tiptoes in like a velvet-slippered page, laying pale light over the rafters and coaxing you out of dreams where codpiece-wearing bears debated nettle pharmacology. Your eyes open to a world that smells, unsurprisingly, of lavender and cooling goose fat. Yesterday's ointment jar sits on the stool, lid askew, as though it, too, needed fresh air. When you swing your legs to the floor, the knees only sigh. Proof that pottery shards, nettle balm, and nightly lean-a-bed suspension have forged an unlikely wellness trifecta. Joke number 1 taps your shoulder. Tudor wellness retreats charge extra if the moss poultice still has live slugs. Downstairs, the lesser hall hums with anticipation. Lady Margaret, cheeks flushed with administrative zeal, announces the arrival of a traveling apothecary whose cart promises exotics from Barbary to the Baltic. That phrase alone wakes you faster than any rooster, and certainly quicker than the peacock, who is still sulking after losing yesterday's curtain call to a roaring bear. While rye bread toasts over the hearth, you draft mental shopping lists. Fewer herbs ending in mint, more ending in unpronounceable Latin. A mainstream fact floats in with the steam. Tudor apothecaries, licensed by city guilds, roamed the countryside after plague years thinned urban clientele, turning village greens into pop-up pharmacies centuries before pop-ups were a branding strategy. By mid-morning the courtyard hosts that very pop-up. The apothecary, Master Silas Finch, resembles a bundled sparrow wearing more pouches than a roofer's belt. Each pouch jingles with glass vials. His cart overflows with bundles of dried flowers, stoppered jars of jewel-toned powders, and a chained, leather-bound ledger heavy enough to stun a moose. He greets everyone with a bow so low you fear he'll inhale the gravel, then proceeds to unpack wares onto a trestle. Valerian root curls inside linen like sleeping seahorses. Bright orange calendula petals glow, and nestled between them shimmers a vial of poppy seed oil as dark as midnight ink. You lean closer. Finch insists the oil soothes the sinews after penitential kneeling and encourages a slumber pure as a chapel bell. You remind him, politely, that pure slumber is hard to quantify when peacocks hold night shifts, but curiosity still sparks. Joke number 2 whispers, if the oil can outsnore a peacock, bottle it by the barrel and retire wealthy. Finch demonstrates a sleep tincture, equal parts valerian, poppy oil, and honey mulled over faint coals. The scent rises, earthy, slightly bitter, faintly floral, and your eyelids half closed just sniffing. He cautions everyone to start with a swallow no wider than a magpie's foot, because historians still argue whether Tudor sedatives calmed nerves or merely relocated the patient to St. Peter's waiting room. The priest crosses himself at the dosage warning, but Lady Margaret's eyebrows arch. Research must proceed. While Finch tallies sales, you wander his cart and uncover a smaller chest labeled Curiosa. Inside lie sachets of powdered unicorn horn, ground oyster shell, he admits with a wink, and more intriguingly, a bundle of desiccated toads stitched into tiny linen bags. He claims the toad poultice draws out melancholia when affixed behind the left ear. Quirky tidbit acquired. You resolve never to let a toad anywhere near your ear canal. Still, Lady Margaret purchases one for the manor's chronically gloomy cat, just to annoy it. Afternoon sun slides along the courtyard wall, and you carry your treasurers, valerian bundle, thimble of poppy oil, and 0 toads, back to the solar. There, you and the steward copy Finch's recipes into the margin of Dr. Gerard's herbal, careful to note every warning in crimson ink. Ink blotches resemble blackberry stains. You recall the miller's poppy seeds and wonder if yesterday's fair loaves had a medically meaningful kick. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers dosed bread intentionally or simply enjoyed the extra nap. Experimentation hour arrives. You mix 3 valerian shavings, 2 drops of oil, and a spoon of honey, then swirl until the potion resembles muddy amber. The smell is half forest floor, half candle wick, but you sip, bracing for fireworks. Warmth crawls from throat to toes. Knees unlatch like well-oiled hinges, shoulders glide off invisible hooks, and joke number 3 drifts in lazily. If this is what poppies whisper, no wonder Dorothy opted for a quick meadow nap. Evening finds you at vespers floating, figuratively, on a valerian cloud. The Lena bed feels like a personal gondola. You rock gently while psalms lap against stone walls. Mid-chant, the priest pauses to share a footnote. Some early monastics called poppy tincture the red novice, because it put novices to sleep before they could finish reciting matins. Historians still argue whether that story is cautionary or simply monastic stand-up comedy. The altar boys giggle. Lady Margaret pretends not to. After prayers, Finch joins supper to discuss trade routes. He describes Venetian merchants packing saffron inside hollowed-out candles to dodge Iberian tariffs. Smugglers with aromatic drip. You log the scheme for a future morality subplot titled Contraband Candle of Covetousness. Meanwhile, the cook ladles out parsnip pottage spiked, thankfully with nothing soporific. Otherwise half the table might faceplant before grace. The peacock lurks by the hearth, dignity bruised, but perks up when Finch shakes crumbs from his jerkin. Night settles. In your chamber you light a single beeswax taper, its flame steady as a librarian's hush. You rub nettle balm on knees, control group loyalty, then measure another magpie foot of valerian brew. Outside, rain patters lightly. The repaired roof keeps stoic silence. You slip into the lean bed, padded headrest cupping your skull like a benevolent gauntlet, and feel warmth pooling behind your eyelids. Before surrendering, you scrawl 2 margin notes in the Book of Hours. Test nettle versus valerian during next vigil and find out if toads sue for defamation. Ink still wet, you close the book, extinguish the candle, and listen as darkness settles over lavender sachets, nettle jars, and one snubbed peacock who finally rustles onto his perch without fanfare. Breath slows, joints slacken. The manor seems to exhale with you. The poppy oil hums a lullaby older than psalms, and you slip beneath its melody, knees uncomplaining, slate roof steady, jokes curled like cats at the foot of the bed. Morning arrives with a long, luxurious sigh, slipping pastel light through the diamond-paned windows and etching ripples of gold across your blanket. You blink awake beneath the familiar perfume of lavender, rosemary, and a lingering hint of valerian from last night's dab of Finch's sleep tonic. Your joints perform their daily roll call. Ankles salute, shoulders shrug, and the knees respond with only a polite creak, proof that nettle balm, pottery shard padding, and nightly lean-a-bed sessions are turning you into the unofficial poster child for Tudor physical therapy. Joke number 1 stretches beside you. If there were an herbal frequent kneeler program, you'd have earned a complimentary sprig of unicorn-free horn by now. You shuffle down the corridor, finding the lesser hall already buzzing. Lady Margaret, quill behind one ear, announces that a traveling minstrel troupe will visit by noon, bringing songs, satire, and, no surprise, fresh gossip from court. Mainstream fact sprinkles over the announcement. Rural manors craved these visits because news often traveled faster in rhyme than in royal dispatches, making minstrels the Tudor equivalent of push notifications. Over breakfast, rye toast dabbed with butter and drizzled with the last of yesterday's ginger syrup, you help the cook debate whether to flavor today's pottage with Angelica or play it safe with thyme. She votes thyme. You quietly mourn Angelica's near miss and vow to lobby harder at supper. While trenchers are cleared, the steward shares a quirky tidbit. Some minstrels carried ciphered verses that doubled as secret messages, slipping diplomatic hints past eavesdroppers under layers of metaphor. Historians still argue whether these lyrical couriers were genuine spies or just boastful bards inflating their tip jar, but your imagination leaps to visions of coded couplets fluttering over castle walls mid-morning. You steal into the garden to gather rosemary sprigs for the manor's door lintels. Old Will swears it keeps thieves, moths, and bad puns outside. As you snip, the nettle-oiled knees bend without protest, a triumph that makes you hum Temperance's fairground monologue to the cabbages. The peacock, still licking theatrical wounds, sidles by with a muffled squawk that sounds suspiciously like a snicker. You bow with exaggerated flourish. Forgiveness may be a long campaign. Trumpet blasts roll over the meadow. The minstrels have arrived. They enter the courtyard in a riot of velvet, lute cases, and jingling ankle bells. One carries a tiny drum painted with a bear in a codpiece. Callback merch from yesterday's star performer, no doubt. Their leader, Master Rowan, greets Lady Margaret in rapid doggerel that manages to rhyme lavender, scavenger, and misadventure. Joke number 2 pirouettes through your mind. If he can rhyme lean abed, you'll buy his next pamphlet sight unseen. The troupe sets up near the herb plots. Rowan tunes a lute whose peg box sports carved griffin heads. Each string pluck sends bees looping lazy figure eights over the sage. He opens with a ballad of King Arthur's cook who seasons soup with dragon scales. Crunchy yet morally dubious. The household cackles. You feel the marrow of your fair fresh applause muscles twitch. Between songs, Rowan unrolls a scroll of London tidings. The candle tax may expand to cover rushlights, causing panic among night owl scholars. A new fencing manual promises footwork light as gossip, and, more tantalizing, rumors swirl that a certain playwright is drafting a tragedy set entirely during bedtime prayers. You stifle a laugh. Someone's obviously been eavesdropping on your nightly knees. Rowan segues into a coded ditty about lilies bowing before iron thrones. Lady Margaret's eyebrow arches. The steward murmurs that such metaphors sometimes mask political satire. Historians still debate whether coded lyrics ever ignited rebellions or simply sparked wine-soaked debates, but the possibility makes every rhyme feel electric. After the performance, you escort the troupe to the kitchen for ale and oatcakes. The cook produces a platter of thyme-scented cheese, which earns her a polite groan from your Angelica-loving soul. Yet Rowan devours it with gusto, declaring thyme the herb of heroic consonance. He asks about your Lena bed. Within minutes, the carpenter wheels it out for a demonstration. Rowan straps in, strums a chord, and croons a lullaby so sweet the dairy maid forgets her butter rhythm and splatters cream onto her shoes. Joke number 3 slides on stage. Perhaps you should patent the device as recliner bird, guaranteed to turn any musician into instant chamber choir. Afternoon shifts the light from gold to butterscotch. Lady Margaret assigns you to guide the minstrels through the chapel, hoping the reliquary box will inspire reverent artistry. St. George's lance glints. Rowan kneels, gingerly, studying the gilded saints before jotting rhyming couplets in a notebook made of calfskin so thin it might float away. You notice he sketches the Lena bed beside St. Agatha's veil, labeling it Holy Hammock, and you chuckle, picturing tomorrow's crowd humming madrigals while semi-vertical, by twilight. The troupe readies to leave, pockets jingling with coin and heads crammed with new chord progressions. Rowan presses a folded parchment into your hand. A short verse praising temperance, still missing that stubborn E, and proclaiming your knees stalwart hinges of nocturnal devotion. You promise to add the missing letter before tucking it into the book of hours alongside blackberry ink margin notes. Evening prayers call. The Lena bed stands waiting, candlelight flickering along its polished oak. Tonight your knees vote for full suspension mode. You oblige, easing back as the priest intones Psalm 133. Between verses, he cites a mainstream fact. Medieval brotherhoods often used communal songs to reinforce bonds, a practice echoed in today's minstrel revels. He then wonders aloud, historians still argue, he says, whether private households like Lady Margaret's helped preserve folk melodies while court music chased Italian fashions. The notion that your herb-saturated haven is a secret archive makes you stand an extra degree taller in the sling. Compline concludes with a chanted in Manus Tuas. You extinguish the candle, step free of the Lena bed, and follow the procession of rushlights to supper. Pea soup kissed with, yes, Angelica at last. You beam at the cook. She winks, having hidden a sprig expressly for you. The peacock circles the table, spirited but silent, perhaps soothed by earlier lute chords. Finally, you retreat to your chamber. The pig bladder bottle brims with valerian-steeped water, courtesy of Master Finch, who left a note promising dreams feather-soft. You slip it under the covers, smear a respectful dab of nettle on knees for scientific continuity, and open Rowan's ode. The missing E still rankles, but the rhymes sing. You tuck the parchment beside the playbill, both mementos of days when walls echoed with applause and bears and codpieces danced quadrilles. Outside, rain whispers against the well-mended roof. Inside, rosemary garlands sway like sleepy sentries. You close your eyes, letting lute echo, thyme cheese, and Angelica soup swirl into one drowsy flavor. Breath slows, joints settle, the manor sighs. Somewhere down the corridor, the Lena bed creaks. Maybe the carpenter testing a midnight improvement, or perhaps it's just with settling after a day of song. Either way, you sink into the blankets, knees murmuring gratitude, jokes curled like commas until the next sentence of sleep begins. Dawn drifts in like a shy minstrel encore, pale notes of light tiptoeing across your blanket and plucking you from a dream in which St. George's mermaid sang backup while the peacock played tambourine. You stretch, half expecting applause, but only the soft burble of rain gutters answers. Knees flex. No creak, just a polite click, as if the nettle bomb held a midnight board meeting and passed the no more complaints resolution. Joke number 1 yawns beside you. You're one tincture away from founding the first church of herbal chiropractics. Padding to the window, you spot a pair of rabbit-skin slippers Lady Margaret left as thanks for shepherding yesterday's minstrels. The fur is so soft it feels vaguely illegal, and you remember a quirky tidbit old will once mumbled. Certain northern households believed rabbit slippers kept nightmares from nibbling toes. Historians still argue whether the practice worked or just guaranteed toeless rabbits, but you slide them on anyway, Your dreamscape already has enough wildlife with codpiece-clad bears. Downstairs, the lesser hall smells of barley porridge brighten with trumpet fanfare, Angelica. The cook beams. Your lobbying clearly bore fruit, or at least fragrant stems. Lady Margaret reads a freshly delivered letter, the wax seal still glossy. Mainstream fact: Tudor post traveled via mounted couriers who changed horses at posting houses. A relay system that could move royal news faster than a peacock can collect grudges. This letter confirms the dreaded candle and rushlight tax will pass next quarter. Joke number 2 lights up. Congratulations, darkness is now a luxury product. The steward grumbles about budgets while you spoon porridge, wondering if lavender-scented darkness will cost extra. Between bites, you volunteer to draft an inventory of every lighting device in the manor. Partly altruism, partly an excuse to count how many lean-a-bed candle hooks the carpenter has secretly added in his nocturnal tinkering. List in hand, you tour the corridors. You tally torches, rushlights, beeswax tapers, even the rogue fish oil candle banished to the dairy because it smells like low tide at Venice. In the chapel you find the priest adjusting a brand new sconce shaped like a tiny angel holding, what else, lavender sprigs. He admits angels aren't deductible under the new tax, but aesthetic exemptions aren't in the bill either, so better safe than sorry. Candle count complete, you detour to the solar where the Book of Hours lies open to yesterday's margin poem, the missing E still screaming like a silent trumpet. You add it with a flourish, then tuck the parchment beside Rowan's ode. Inspiration strikes. Perhaps you can translate the coded minstrel verses for Lady Margaret. You sharpen a quill, channel your inner spy, and spend an hour converting metaphors about lilies and iron thrones into possible commentary on foreign policy. There's debate. Historians still argue whether such lyrics ever meant anything deeper than "buy me ale." But puzzle hunting feels deliciously cloak and dagger. Mid-morning rain slackens, allowing you to slip outside for herb patrol. You test rosemary door sprigs, still aromatic guard dogs, then check the nettle patch, which appears offended by yesterday's harvest and bristles menacingly. You leave it be and revisit the melancholy cat wearing its toed poultice like a surly fascinator. The cat glares but hasn't attempted self-immolation, so perhaps the remedy works or, at minimum, distracts from existential dread. Joke number 3 purrs. Next fair you'll market toad-top hats. Because even your ennui deserves an accessory. Noon bell clangs. Dinner steam fogs the windows. Today's menu: lentil stew laced with peppercorns, a splurge to console everyone about the candle tax. You sit beside the carpenter who unveils lean-a-bed Mark III schematics, now featuring a flip-down shelf for hymnals and an adjustable lantern bracket to dodge taxation by classifying light as sacred study glow. You applaud the loophole. The priest silently blesses the blueprint. After the meal, Lady Margaret assembles a small sleep workshop in the Great Hall to test Master Finch's tinctures. Volunteers include the steward, the dairymaid, and, you saw this coming, the peacock, who wanders in the moment he hears the word applause. Each participant receives a thimble of valerian poppy syrup except the bird, who gets a sprinkle on grain. 15 minutes later the steward snores into an account ledger. The dairymaid hums lullabies mid-churn, and the peacock tips sideways, tail fanned like a technicolor rug, blissfully mute. Success metrics write themselves. Lady Margaret takes notes, but the priest raises an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether induced naps border on sorcery or are merely advanced hospitality. You suggest calling the concoction Reverent Restorer, marketing it as a devotional aid that ensures parishioners won't fidget during sermons, though they might nap through them. The priest considers, half scandalized, half intrigued. Twilight leans in, painting the walls honey brown. You help the carpenter install 2 of his lantern brackets on the lean-a-bed stationed in the chapel. Candles nestle into tiny iron jaws shaped like dragon heads, tribute to yesterday's minstrel ballad of dragon-scale soup. You test the mechanism, reclining with a hymnal while warm light bathes St. George's unwavering lance. The angle is perfect. Knees celebrate with a subtle absence of pain. Vespers commences. Tonight you stand, or rather incline, in lean-a-bed Mark III, candle bracket labeled Research Prototype. During Psalm 85 you notice the peacock missing from his usual rood screen balcony. presumably still passed out in the hall. Good for everyone's eardrums. The priest's homily references Saint Cecilia, patroness of musicians, noting that her night-long vigils often involved silent song in the heart. Historians still debate whether that phrase means actual music or metaphorical mindfulness, but either way, Linabed seems an ideal apparatus for heart concerts. Compline closes. The household disperses to supper, barley bread with jam made from the last blackberries of the season. You finally taste Angelica again, candied and tucked beside the jam like a secret green jewel. The cook nods, triumphant. Night deepens. In your chamber, rabbit slippers wait by the Linabed. You dab nettle balm? Tradition. Measure a magpie-foot dose of sleep tonic, then pause, contemplating the candle tax. You blow out the taper early. Rebellion starts small. Slip beneath the blanket with only moonlight filtering through rain-washed glass. Knees sigh, joints unknot, and darkness feels suddenly luxurious, priceless, smuggler-proof. Breath slows. Somewhere in the hall, a toad-toting cat shuffles, but otherwise silence rules. You picture tomorrow's ledger showing one less taxable candle, one more herbal victory, and perhaps an addendum, peacock pacified via valerian, results promising. Jokes fold into dream packets. The manor exhales. Sleep descends. Not the crash of exhaustion, but a feather that settles on rosemary-guarded doorways and rabbit fur toes, promising that in the morning you'll wake ready to count candles, decode lyrics, and laugh before the first lavender petal hits the floor. Dawn squeezes through the shutters like a nosy neighbor, slipping thin ribbons of pearl across your blanket before you're entirely ready to say goodbye to sleep. The manor lies surprisingly quiet. No peacock fanfare, no toad-poulticed cat conducting hall floor percussion. You inhale, taste cedar from the new hooded Linabed still airing in the chapel, and decide that knees feeling only mildly vintage is reason enough to rise. Joke number 1 rubs its hands. Congratulations, you've unlocked the snooze without bruise achievement. Sliding into rabbit slippers, you notice the soul cake crumb you left on the sill has gone missing. Either the aunties enjoyed second helpings or the mouse delegation has claimed reparations. You pat the window frame in truce, then shuffle down the corridor where a lone goose-fat rushlight struggles against dawn. You pinch it dark. Every saved flame is, after all, a silent protest against Parliament's new light levied in the lesser hall. Breakfast smells of oat groats bolstered by dried bilberries. Winter's attempt at fruit optimism. Lady Margaret waits beside a parchment from the county assize court. Mainstream fact arrives with her sigh. Justices of the peace convene quarterly to inspect parish poor rolls, and yours is due next week. Any discrepancies can earn a fine large enough to finance a minor war or, worse, a major wedding. You volunteer to cross-check names. She rewards you with the pot's first ladleful. Bowl in hand, you join the carpenter at the trestle. He's sketching a miniature Lena stool for itinerant friars, half sling, half shepherd's crook, fully portable. He swears folding legs can be forged from repurposed pike heads. Quirky tidbit slides across the table. Some German pilgrims of the era actually toted Gestachstuhl, walking stick seats that doubled as cudgels against roadside thieves. Historians still argue whether they were more useful for sitting or swatting. You vote for both and doodle a glowworm lantern on the handle for night travel swagger. Mid-morning rain drapes the orchard in silver threads. Perfect weather for indoor bureaucracy. You and the steward huddle in the solar, cross-referencing the poor roll with Lady Margaret's spice inventory. Joke number 2 elbows forward. Who knew cloves and orphans would end up in the same spreadsheet? You note that Dame Alice's flax stipend is short by 2 pennies. The steward blames ledger goblins, then blushes at your raised brow and scribbles restitution. When drizzle thins, you wander to the herb garden for fresh nettles. The bomb jar is scraping bottom. Nettles glisten, daring you to pluck them bare-handed. You opt for tongs, still smarting from the last stingfest. A robin watches, head tilted like a tiny auditor. You remember the mainstream fact that Tudor apothecaries classified nettle not only as anti-inflammatory but also as a textile fiber, spun into thread during linen shortages. You promise the robin you'll try weaving one day, preferably after perfecting your bomb so the weaving doesn't hurt more than the shortage. Back indoors, the cook tests a spice-free pea pottage laced with crushed mustard seed. Cheaper, legal, and nose-clearing enough to double as house cleaning. You sneeze approval, then add a dash of winter savory for rounded palate synergy. A phrase the cook repeats with mock reverence before telling you to stir. Noon brings dinner. Rye trenchers piled with pottage, one honest slab of white cheese, and, in smug defiance of levies, a single candied Angelica ribbon set dead center like culinary exclamation. The priest shares that Parliament's candle tax has already sparked smuggling rings along the Thames. Mainstream fact again, where barrels labeled pickled eels actually hold beeswax. Historians still debate whether the wax arrived smelling fishy or if smugglers perfected double barrels. Either way, you file the anecdote beside eelskin shoelace lore. Joke number 3 flicks its tail. Looks like eels just wriggled into the lighting industry. After dishes, Lady Margaret dispatches you to the tithe barn to weigh late barley donations. Inside, cool shadows smell of grain and hidden cats. You jot numbers, then spy the green comet pebble glowing faintly in your pocket. On impulse you press it to a tooth. Still no ache. Then to the barn cat's ear. The cat yawns, uninterested in cosmic dentistry, and resumes stalking imaginary mice. Late afternoon reveals clear sky, so you haul the new astrolabe outside for its maiden reading. Aligning brass sights with the pale sun, you chart altitude, scribble degrees, then calculate with fingers an estimate of solstice approach. You'll need proper tables, but the numbers feel promising, like planting a flag on time itself. You sketch a margin note, astrolabe accuracy, subject to glowworm refraction error. Twilight pours grape purple across stone walls. Glowworm jars appear one by one, emerald pulses echoing heartbeats. You escort Lenabed Mark IV to chapel for a quiet Vespers trial. The cedar hood now lined with rabbit fur trimmings so cold breath won't fog prayers. You slip into the sling, gears sigh, hood cradles warmth, and candlelight, reflected from polished pewter plates, schemes the cedar in comforting waves. Psalm 65 rises like mist. You hum harmony beneath your breath. Mid-service. The priest quotes St. John Chrysostom on charity measured not by weight but by willingness. A sermon aimed at next week's poor roll audit. You resolve to check barn surplus again tomorrow, just in case. A scholarly debate phrase surfaces when he adds, historians still wrestle with whether early church alms lists were spiritual checksums or political flex. The congregation blinks, digesting both pottage and historiography. Compline follows quickly. You light no extra tapers, letting glowworm constellations anchor the hush. After prayers, the carpenter lingers to admire how rabbit trim dampened echo under the hood. You jot a note, acoustic velvetification. Success. Supper time, really a modest bowl of leftover pottage, passes as the household trades stories. The steward predicts spice smugglers will soon hide cloves in hollow quills. You wager they'll bake them into false soul cakes. The priest shakes his head, muttering that sin is endlessly inventive. Upstairs, you warm nettle balm on the hearth, add a drip of mustard oil for extra vigor, and label the jar with glowworm ink. Pig bladder bottle waits, steaming with thyme sage infusion. Legal, comforting, mildly soporific. You settle into blankets, consult the astrolabe through the window. The dreadlock comet blazes westward, a white scratch on velvet. You whisper goodnight to it, to the glowworms, to the industrious robin, even to imaginary eel smugglers. The book of hours lies open to a blank margin. You pen, comfort and compliance may yet share a bed. Ink dries, eyelids follow. Knees unknot, bomb cools and darkness, taxed or not, wraps you in the quiet authority of a cedar hood. Dreams shuffle close. Choir stalls rocking like ships, peacocks whispering star coordinates, nettles weaving into silk thread. Breath deepens, jokes ease off duty, and the manor, softly lit by worms and willpower, sighs you into tomorrow's slow, gently humorous story. Sleep unknots itself the moment the peacock cough crows. Half yodel, half bagpipe, and you blink into a dawn the color of skimmed milk. Frost halos the inside of the cowbladder panes, but your knees, freshly mustard nettle-oiled, rise with only a single click, like polite applause from an audience that has heard your opening act 16 times already. Joke number 1 yawns at the foot of the bed. If Tudor mornings offered a snooze button, it would undoubtedly be carved from goose bone and taxed by sunset. Rabbit slippers ferry you across rushes strewn last night with crushed winter savory. Each step releases a peppery puff, the manor's budget alternative to scented candles. Down the corridor you pinch out a dying rushlight and salute the glowworm jar still pulsing aquarium green above it. Proof that beetle biolumens outlast tallow every time that I end the lesser hall. Breakfast smells of rye toast and the cook's daring substitution. Powdered horseradish for band pepper. It hits your nostrils like a jousting lance. Tears spring, sinuses clear, and joke number 2 gallops past. Congratulations, you just achieved theological enlightenment by breathing salad dressing. Lady Margaret snorts into her cup of barley coffee. Then slides you a parchment stamped with the county seal. Auditors will arrive in 2 days to verify the pour roll, candle counts, and you read twice. Recently reported mechanical devotional furniture. Lena Bed has made the gossip circuit. You and the carpenter retreat to the solar for emergency polishing. Cedar hood gleams, lambskin gears whisper dryly as you test the swing, and he unveils an optional clip-on writing shelf so auditors can take notes mid-rock. A mainstream fact drifts in with the sawdust. By Elizabeth's reign, itinerant officials often carried portable desks called scriptoria. Fold-out boards used atop saddles. Your shelf feels like a devotional upgrade. Late morning, drizzle paints the courtyard, so you tackle the parish roster indoors. Names unfurl like roots. Dame Alice, Saint Toast the bakery cat, the 3 flax-spinning orphans, the miller's apprentice with eel shoelace shoes, quill scratches, and the steward peers over your shoulder reminding you that each recipient must show manifest need. You write that the cat offers regulation of morale and vermin, sealing the argument in glowworm ink. Quirky tidbit appears when Lady Margaret adds a footnote. Certain Venetian city councils once paid official cats out of public funds. Historians still argue whether the payouts curbed rats or simply set a precedent for feline pension fraud. Rain eases by sext. You join old Will beneath the mermaid weathervane to string fresh rosemary bundles over door lintels. He confides that he's experimenting with weaving nettle fibers into thin knee wraps. Breathable penitence, he calls it. You promise your joints as guinea pigs once the auditors leave. Joke number 3 flutters. If we'll patents them, expect sackcloth and ash knee sleeves at every monastery gift shop by Advent. Noon dinner, still the day's heavy hitter, features lentil carrot stew sharpened with horseradish microdoses. The priest shares a homily in progress comparing spiritual vigilance to properly scalded rushes. Both, he claims, keep darkness from creeping in. Mid-lecture he slips the open scholarly debate phrase of the day. Historians still dispute whether early Christian anchorites lined cells with aromatic reeds for hygiene or mystic symbolism. You scribble the quote for later margin fun beside the doodle of a glowworm in a monk's cowl. After dishes, the carpenter lugs Lena Bed to the chapel for rehearsal. You clamber in, clip the writing shelf, and pretend to be an auditor jotting penalties. Rocking gently, you discover a flaw. The shelf tilts when the sling passes its forward apex, launching your quill like a tiny catapult. Both of you stare at the ink blot on St. George's lance. Mercifully near the dragon, not the saint. Crisis averted, you adjust the hinge pin, noting launch hazard in your field journal. Mid-afternoon sunlight leaks through stained glass, painting the floor ruby and emerald. You gather the orphans for psalm practice. Auditors love pious choruses. Their small voices echo beneath the cedar hood, and you remember the soul cake legend. You promise them leftover crumbs if they hit the high note in Psalm 100. Bribery, but holy, twilight sidles in smelling of damp wool and simmering beet broth. The cook rallies the kitchen into conceal-in-season mode, hiding 1 contraband clove inside a walnut shell to scent the stock. You log it under aromatics ledger. 1 clove, liturgical use, shell disguised. The steward nods gravely, as though you've penned a state secret. At Vespers. Lena Bed stands center aisle for final stress test. Candle quota: 4 rushlights, 1 humble taper, 6 glowworm jars. You recline, cedar hood muffling outside drips, and guide the orphans through Psalm 100. They nail the top note. St. George's ruby reflection seems almost to smile. The priest's brief homily riffs on Matthew's lilies of the field, cost-free splendor, even as he casts a pointed glance at your imported lambskin gears. You whisper that lilies don't pay candle tax either. Compline arrives, compact and efficient. When the final amen settles, you escort the orphans to the kitchen for promised crumb distribution, then duck into the scriptorium. There, you and Lady Margaret draft tomorrow's tour route: Tithe Barn first, cats on display; herb garden, rosemary deterrence; chapel, lean a bed demonstration; solar, spice ledger, glowworm metrics. You underline no peacock interruptions, both of you knowing it's futile. Back in your chamber, you warm nettle balm, dab knees, and test Will's prototype fiber wrap. Slightly scratchy but promising. Pig bladder bottle brims with rosemary mint infusion labeled for auditor anxiety. You set the comet pebble on the new clip-on shelf, safely detached, and practice sliding the shelf without catapulting objects. A bedtime fidget that soon feels hypnotic. The Book of Hours, faithful confidant, lies open to last night's margin. You add auditors inbound, quill trajectory improbable, horseradish fury effective. Quill down, rushlight pinched, you slip beneath blankets. Glowworm jars pulse like tiny lantern choruses rehearsing tomorrow's big number. Outside, rain resumes, polite as a lullaby on sheepskin drums. You breathe in cedarhood memory, breathe out bureaucratic dread, and drift toward dreams where auditors applaud mitful glowworms, cats file honest tax returns, and your knees, wrapped in nettle couture, dance through Psalm 100 without a single click. You surface before the bell, nerves tingling like harp strings. Auditor day has arrived, and every floorboard knows it. Dawn light slips around frost feathers on the panes, tinting the room lagoon blue while the peacock rehearses throat-clearing gargles that promise unscripted commentary. You breathe in nettle mustard fumes still rising from your knees and recite a quick mental litany. Ledgers balanced, lean a bed polished, soul cakes tallied, cat bribed with bakery heat. Joke number 1 stretches wide. Nothing like a bureaucrat's visit to reveal whether your herb-scented house of cards is actually origami or wet parchment. Downstairs, Lady Margaret presides over a war council disguised as breakfast. Barley coffee steams beside rye toast hidden under horseradish snowdrifts. It clears the sinuses, yes, but also ensures no auditor drowses mid-inspection. She slides you the day's order: Tithe barn first, herb garden second, chapel third, solar last. Sequence avoids peacock zones, she whispers. 2 seconds later, the bird struts through the doorway, tail at half-mast, disproving the map. You offer it a soul cake crumb diversion. Dignity accepts. The household fans out. You escort the steward to the tithe barn, your breath clouding the chill air like ghost ink. Inside, grain mounds rise in neat ramparts. Cats patrol rafters, Saint Toast in the lead, fresh ash from the oven still warming his fur like a portable halo. You point him out to the steward, who scribbles, pest control, proactive. A mainstream fact sneaks in with your explanation. Tudor quarter sessions often find manors where barn cats were fewer than 5 per 1,000 bushels, valuing feline labor almost as highly as human threshers. With weights verified, you hustle to the herb garden. Rows of rosemary glisten under hoarfrost. Nettle beds wear muslin shrouds to protect from audits and winter alike. Old wool weights, demonstrating new NERAP prototypes. Nettles softened by repeated sluicing in lye, then woven into cloth no scratchier than monk wool. You promise to debut them tonight. He beams, revealing an unexpected quirky tidbit. Flemish soldiers supposedly stuffed nettle cloth inside boots to stimulate circulation on long marches. Historians still argue whether that tale reflects genuine military practice or is merely a wool guild smear campaign to promote flax. Boots crunch back toward the courtyard just as hoofs clatter over the bridge. 2 auditors appear, wrapped in charcoal capes pinned with pewter badges depicting royal candles. Tax symbolism incarnate. One carries a portable desk strapped to his saddle, a real scriptorium. The other totes calipers and a suspiciously large sniff box. You greet them with a bow deep enough to test newly limber knees, then launch your rehearsed script. Welcome, gentles, to a manor where frugality and devotion hold equal office. Joke number 2 glints. Let's hope they appreciate scriptural puns disguised as budget lines. First stop, herb garden. You highlight rosemary door wards, security measure, scent-based. Then display nettle burlap samples. The caliper auditor measures thread count while the sniffbox auditor leans into a rosemary bush and sneezes approval, chalking uncursed on his wax tablet. Sensing momentum, you escort them to the tithe barn. Saint Toast executes a flawless mouse-dangling demonstration. Both auditors cluck happily and note, feline surplus, commendable. Onward to the chapel. The peacock attempts to follow, but Lady Margaret intercepts with strategic oat kernels. Inside, dragon-head candle brackets gleam under the set quota of rushlights. Lena Bed stands center aisle, cedar hood aromatic. You usher the senior auditor into the sling, secure the writing shelf, and hand him the glowworm lumen chart. Gears purr, he sways surprised. While he rocks, the priest leads the orphans in a fragment of Psalm 15, voices pure as melted frost. The auditor scratches notes, ink steady despite movement. You mentally high-five the carpenter. Lambskin modulation works. Mid-demo. The junior auditor unveils a sandglass to time candle burn. You politely redirect his interest to glowworms. 2 Magnificat verses per jar, as our ledger shows. He raises a brow but logs the metric. Just then the peacock sneaks past Lady Margaret, leaps onto the rude rail, and issues a triumphant HREWWA. The cedar hood muffles but fails to erase the shriek. You pivot. Our living color guard, Sir Dieter's theft and drowsiness. The auditor inhales, jots avian alarm, non-taxable, and you exhale. All seems settled until the caliper man inspects dragon brackets. Foreign leather? He asks, fingering lambskin buffers. Open scholarly debate phrase arrives on cue. Historians still argue whether Tudor sumptuary laws applied to ecclesiastical furnishings or only garments. You cite the ambiguity, offer inventory of local parchment scraps, and show a bucket of offcuts destined for compost. Satisfied, perhaps dazzled by your spontaneity, he nods approval. Final review occurs in the solar. Spice ledger, candle counts, glowworm registries line the trestle in militant rows. The sniffbox auditor opens each jar, nose twitching like a ferret. Horseradish fumes cause him to gulp, but he concedes, domestic seasoning. Your A-ledger of cloves lists exactly 4, and there they are, sealed inside walnut shells. He weighs them, records figures, then requests witness signatures. Saint Toast obliges by curling on the parchment. Paw prints are deemed whimsical but binding with quills flourished. The auditors seal their report. Compliant, frugal, mechanical posture aid exemplary for piety. They decline supper, likely wary of horseradish ambush, and ride off into drizzle, capes snapping like satisfied banners. The moment the gate closes, the manor erupts in quiet cheers. Even the peacock bows head, mission accomplished. Late afternoon finds you in the kitchen, sampling Victor's broth laced, liberally now, with mustard and winter savory. The cook announces a celebratory tart using the auditor's leftover travel figs. Contraband by dusk, legal at noon, perfection now. You steal an early slice, sweetness clinging to chilly air like a secret song. Twilight drapes corridors. You and the carpenter install nettle knee wraps, first production run before vespers. They warm like discreet braziers without sting. Knees feel feather-jointed. The priest tests Lena Bed with hood down and declares it as snug as St. Bridget's cloak. Candle quota, briefly lifted, allows 1 beeswax taper beyond ledger. Lady Margaret lights it herself, eyes shining. Compline tonight shimmers with relief. Psalm 116 rises, gratitude made sound, echoing soft against cedar. You recline, wraps glowing under wool, and feel joints hum content. When prayers end, the peacock produces a muted trill. Curtain call done right. Back in your chamber, comet pebble gleams on the windowsill beside the astrolabe aligned to frost blue stars. You ink a fresh margin. Auditors pleased. Peacock contained, mostly. Nettle wraps victorious. Joke number 3 lands a curtsy. Supremacy of herbs now officially recognized by crown accountants. Take that, cloves. Rushlight snuffed, glowworm jar elevated, knees wrapped, bottle steaming sagement. You slide beneath blankets. Manor timbers settle with approving creaks. Sleep tiptoes in, scented of cedar, horseradish, and hush. Somewhere St. Toast needs doughy dreams, auditors tally candles in their nightmares, and nettle fibers knit themselves tighter around grateful joints. You drift, weightless, buoyed by the improbable truth that a rocking bed and a jar of beetles just passed royal inspection, and tomorrow's psalms will sway even sweeter. Night settles like quilted velvet over the manor, quieter than a library of sleeping cats, St. Toast included, for once. You breathe in peppery winter savory from the rushes, breathe out the last wisps of auditor anxiety, and tell yourself you've earned an uncomplicated slumber. Joke number 1 smirks. In Tudor England, an uncomplicated slumber is an oxymoron, right up there with affordable cloves. Yet even triumph needs ritual, so you shuffle to the chapel for the customary bedtime prayers. The peacock shadows you down the corridor, talons clicking a soft percussion. At the threshold you perform first precaution. Shoes placed upside down, toe to heel, because, as every self-respecting Tudor knows, mischievous spirits can't steal what they can't slip on one. You mutter thanks to the England-cast lady who reminded you of that. She's probably somewhere turning her own slippers skyward. Inside, glowworm jars breathe emerald halos across wood grain. Rushlights hiss bacon-fat fragrances. Lena bed waits beneath its cedar hood. Lambskin gears oiled and silent. Nettle wraps snug around your knees like leafy compression socks. You ease in, inhale cedar and leftover horseradish, and let the hood muffle the world to a hush no candle tacks can touch. The priest begins Compline with the familiar refrain from Psalm 31. Into your hands I commend my spirit. He lifts a beeswax taper, one of the few legal luxuries still flickering post-levy, and the light paints gold across St. George's lance too. You respond, voice low, almost lulling yourself. A mainstream fact threads through your mind. Most 16th century folk expected 2 distinct sleeps, first sleep and second sleep, with an interval called the watch tucked in between 3. You anticipate that watch already, like a scheduled intermission where knees stretch and gossip simmers. Halfway through the penitential psalm, the priest pauses so everyone can whisper private petitions. You ask for steady grain prices, clove amnesty, and maybe, just maybe, the miracle of a peacock that snores instead of shrieks. No lightning answers, but the bird ruffles feathers in considerate silence, which counts. Prayers conclude with a soft amen. But you stay reclined another minute, savoring the cedar hood's acoustic cocoon. When you finally step out, the peacock follows, tail furled like a closed fan. Together you tread the corridor toward your chamber, glowworm jars winking approval at every corner. At your door you practice a quirky new safeguard gleaned from a Tudor home tour pamphlet. You knock 3 times on the lintel to startle lurking pixies, then recite the miniature grace angels about me, peace within me, before entering one. Historians still argue whether such charms chase sprites or just coax children into bed faster. But hey, sprites pay no rent, so out they go. Inside, frost feathers the cowbladder panes, moonlight turning each vein silver. You slip off nettle wraps, smear fresh balm, now enhanced with Old Will's foxglove leaf oil for circulation, and test the new nettle fiber knee sleeves. They hug joints with toasty firmness, 0 scratch. Joke number 2 tugs your pillow. Welcome to the spa package where sting becomes bling. The pig bladder bottle waits filled with winter savory tea, a legal, warming brew now nicknamed horseradish light. You slide it to your feet, straw mattress crackling like frosted leaves, and recall the auditor's awe when St. Toast stamped the parchment. If only they'd watched you fill out tonight's first sleep objectives in the Book of Hours margin. 1. Avoid moonbeams, lunacy risk. 2. Remember to wake for watch tasks. 3. Dream of tax-free nutmeg. You pinch out the rushlight, leaving only glowworms to stitch constellations onto beams. Sleep seeps in, slow and gentle. Minutes later you slip under, heart-echoing Compline's closing refrain. Somewhere beyond midnight, your body obeys ancestral programming and surfaces for the watch. Eyes open to inkwell dark spangled emerald. Joints murmur but don't object. You sit, shrug on a cloak, and tread softly toward the solar, where others already gather. Lady Margaret checking ledgers, the cook peeling rushes for tomorrow's lights, the priest reading faint psalm print by Jarglow. Mainstream fact materializes in real time, watch activity indeed spans prayer, housekeeping, even low conversation with spouses. 3. You pour ale into a wooden cup, share a nod with the carpenter busy adjusting the lean-a-stool prototype, and feel the camaraderie of sleepless efficiency. A quirky fringe detail pops up when Lady Margaret explains she's turning all shoes upside down, even the auditor's forgotten riding boots, just in case their spirits travel slower than their horses. You laugh, then joke number 3 arrives wearing nettle leggings. Between upturned footwear and glowworm floodlights, any self-respecting demon will look elsewhere for mischief tonight. During the watch you copy lines from the earlier Compline text into the Book of Hours, adding a doodle of St. Toast thumping a calculator. The priest passes, notices, shakes his head, but leaves smiling. Proof humor and holiness can bunk in the same bed. He whispers an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Tudor laypeople truly followed every Latin clause of lengthy night prayers or merely mouthed along, lulled by cadence. You confess you're fluent in mumble Latin yourself. He pats your shoulder, agreement sealed. Tasks done, conversation ebbs. One by one, watchfolk drift back to pallets. You return to your chamber, careful not to jostle the pig bladder bottle now tepid but comforting. Shoes remain upside down. Pixies presumably pacified. You slide beneath blankets, press the comet pebble to your lips. Habit for luck, then tuck it into the cedar box. Glowworms dim slightly. Their two Magnificat shift nearly over. Second sleep drapes you almost instantly, deeper, dreamier. Images float. Auditors riding away trailed by glowworm lanterns. Nettle-clad soldiers stomping frost. The peacock delivering Psalm 100 in falsetto while St. Toast accompanies on tambourine. Whether prophecy or bedside nonsense, it's soothing. Knot by knot, your muscles surrender. The hood of darkness lowers, cedar-scented and kind. Outside, frost spiderwebs across orchard limbs. Inside, the manor breathes in tandem with your even, unburdened breaths. First sleep, watch, second sleep, all rhythms honored. Dawn will come soon with new chores, but for now, angels guard, pixies sulk elsewhere, and you float serenely, your knees, your candles, your budget, and your jokes all peacefully accounted for. The second sleep lifts like a theater curtain, revealing a dawn bathed in pewter and rose. Frost etches lace across the cowbladder panes, and somewhere in the courtyard a rooster tries to outsing the peacock's habitual solo. Fails, squawks, and retreats. You stretch beneath blankets still faintly scented with winter-savory steam from last night's tea. To your pleased surprise, the nettle wraps kept knees so supple that they don't even pop. Instead they give a quiet, approving hum, like well-oiled hinges in a cathedral door. Joke number 1 pats your shoulder. Apparently, nettles have rebranded from painful weed to joint concierge. Down the corridor, glowworm jars flicker their last Magnificat before sunrise cancels their shift. You pinch the lids ajar, letting the tiny lanterns rest, then pad to the lesser hall where toasted barley coffee meets real dairy cream. A treat courtesy of St. Toast's overnight rodent purge. Lady Margaret greets you with 2 items. A fresh printed broadside from London proclaiming an upcoming grand frost fair should the Thames freeze, and a small bolt of nettle cloth, Will's latest weave. Dyed woad blue and soft as second chances, over rye trencher and horseradish-kissed egg, you read the broadside aloud. Mainstream fact pops up. When winters turned vicious, Londoners indeed built frost fairs on the frozen Thames, complete with bookstalls, bowling, and impromptu roast-ox feasts. Lady Margaret's eyes shine. She imagines exporting glowworm lanterns to booth holders before candle taxes spread cityward. You volunteer to draft a marketing pamphlet titled Frugal Fireflies for Fairgoers. Joke number 2 slides onto the trencher. Nothing attracts customers like a slogan promising light that neither melts ice nor empties purses. Breakfast cleared. The household divides for post-audit exhale tasks. You follow the carpenter to the orchard to test nettle wraps in free-range conditions. Frost crunches underfoot, but the wraps insulate joints so well you feel like strolling minstrel instead of creaky scribe. The carpenter unveils a prototype walking stick stool. Think lean abed on a single leg, that clicks open like an iron tulip. You perch, wobble once, then find balance. Surprisingly comfortable. He explains the seat pivots so pilgrims can face any roadside shrine without turning the stick. A quirky tidbit sparkles. He read that Spanish shepherds carved rotating prayer stools topped with sheep horn, though historians still argue whether those gadgets existed or were merely Basque tall tales told over Rioja. You vote possible and promise field notes. Late morning sun paints the mermaid weathervane gold. Old Will beckons you to the herb garden where he's planted winter spinach under cloches made from salvaged glass jugs. It's like watching vegetables huddle under upside-down goblets. He admits glass is pricey but claims spinach morale improves. Historians still argue whether Tudor gardeners really used such cloches or if later antiquarians projected greenhouse envy backward. You offer to log growth rates in exchange for a handful of leaves for supper. Back inside, the priest drafts an Advent homily emphasizing charity's quiet forms. He consults you about weaving psalm references with last week's poor law audit. You suggest the lilies of the field again. Cost-free splendor never gets old. Then slip in a note about turning shoes upside down as spiritual metaphor. Joke number 3 clears its throat. Blessed are the sauls who stand on their heads. The priest groans, but copies the pun in his margin anyway. Noon dinner appears. Lentil spinach stew thickened with yesterday's barley, plus a modest wedge of white cheese that smells like angels took up goat farming. While you eat, the steward reports that 2 neighboring manors want Lena beds after hearing auditors praise yours. Supply chain questions ignite. Cedar availability, lambskin quotas, why goat parchment squeaks louder than sheep. You outline a plan, production tiers labeled novice, monastic, and cardinal deluxe, with extra pillows for doctrinal disagreements. Meal finished. You retreat to the solar where winter light slants onto your astrolabe, aligning sights with the sun. You confirm what the scratch marks hinted yesterday. Solstice sneaks closer than nettles sting. You jot times, then compare to the comet pebble's nightly glow. It seems brighter, though maybe that's anticipation whispering. Afternoon chores hum. You accompany Lady Margaret to the tithe barn to tutor the orphan trio in basic sums. Bushels in, cats out, soul cakes per prayer. Their quills clatter. One doodles a glowworm riding a peacock. Education triumphs in art form, you decide. Mainstream fact surfaces as you explain. Tudor children rarely received formal maths training unless apprenticed to merchants. Barns often doubled as impromptu classrooms on rainy days. The steward peeks in, nods approval, then nearly sneezes on horseradish fumes still lingering in his beard. Twilight creeps. Lavender gray. The cook gifts you a fist-sized loaf studded with raisins. Dream bread, she calls it. Claimed to keep nightmares at bay if placed on a windowsill. You file it under experimental folklore and mentally schedule crumb insurance for the aunties. Vespers tonight feels like an exhale after a sprint. Candle quota relaxed slightly in celebration. 2 beeswax tapers join the glowworm constellations. Lena bed cradles the priest while nettle wraps swaddle your knees. During Psalm 43, you catch the peacock swaying in near-perfect rhythm, tail flicking like a metronome. The priest's homily lands on frost fairs and holy adaptability. God provides skating lanes and roasts oxen when rivers freeze. Parishioners chuckle. You scribble that for the pamphlet. After prayers, Lady Margaret tests the rotating walking stickstool beside the altar, swivels toward St. Agatha's veil, and declares it miraculously convenient. Production greenlit. The carpenter beams, muttering about portable pew sails. Supper is brief. Spinach leftovers atop rye toast, but conversation lingers around the upcoming solstice. You propose a midnight glowworm release to mark longest night, citing Augustine loosely, on tiny lights banishing vast dark. Everyone nods. Even the steward softens, predicting 0 tax on released worms. Back in your chamber, you set the dream bread on the sill, shoes inverted beneath, and tuck the comet pebble into its cedar box. Nettle wraps come off. Bomb goes on, a routine now intimate as prayer. Glowworms pulse against frost stars, and the astrolabe catches moonlight, numbers glimmering like secret runes. You inscribe the Book of Hours margin. Wraps victorious, auditors gone. Frost fair marketing approved. Note: spinach under goblets possibly vanity. Quill set aside. Rushlight pinched. You slip beneath blankets warmed by pig bladder bottle brewing sage lemon balm. Breath slows. Outside, the peacock whispers a lull of rustling feathers. Inside, Nettle cloth waits to be fashioned into the first novice bed sleeve. Sleep draws near, scented of cedar and future ice fairs. In fading awareness, you picture glowworms strung like festival lights across a frozen Thames, auditors skating by holding horseradish mugs, and Saint Toast counting mice on abacus beads. The dream bread's raisins wink approval. Darkness folds, joints rest, and tomorrow will knit nettles into commerce and maybe smuggle a clove to London. For now, rest easy. Your knees, ledgers, and lantern bugs have earned the pause. Gray dawn puddles across the guest chamber floor, nudging you from sleep scented with lavender, beeswax, and yesterday's road dust. You blink at rough-hewn beams, momentarily forgetting you've traded the manor's creaking comfort for the shrine's Spartan loft. Knees test themselves, one polite pop, then silence, before voting in favor of verticality. Joke number 1 tugs your sleeve. If Pilgrim Hostels offered loyalty stamps, 8 more sleeps and you'd earn a complimentary halo buff. You shuffle to the tiny window. Outside, pilgrims already mill about, clutching rosemary tokens blessed during last night's vigil. A bell nearby tolls prime, its tone thinner than your manor's bronze giant, but still sweet. Mainstream fact strolls in. Most Tudor shrines scheduled early services to accommodate walkers aiming to reach the next parish before nightfall. A holy version of beating rush hour traffic. Breakfast proves minimalist, hard cheese, rye heel, watered ale. You miss Porridge's hug, but remember the candle tax looming and decide austerity can be pious, or at least cost-effective. Lady Margaret appears, cloak flapping like a scholarly raven, announcing rain clouds massing in the west. She proposes starting back early before the lanes turn into treacle. You nod while quietly massaging nettle balm into both knees for weather insurance. The return procession winds through hedgerows silvered with dew. Wild violets peep from grassy banks. You pluck one, tucking it beside the rue sprig still pinned to your doublet. Herbal Avengers unite. A mile on, the carpenter flags everyone down to unveil his latest mischief. Overnight he lashed the Lena bed to a barrow frame borrowed from the shrine gardener. The result, half handcart, half throne. Rattles like a future museum exhibit titled Early Tudor Mobility Aid. Do not sit. Quirky tidbit time. He swears strolling friars once mounted preaching stools on wheels to chase reluctant sinners. Historians still argue whether that was zeal or traveling circus. Testing commences. You perch gingerly, knees grateful for the mobile cushion as the carpenter and steward share pushing duties. Jokes number 2 arrives grinning. Congratulations, you're the world's first rideshare passenger rated by Psalm count. The contraption creaks down the lane, passing hedgerow robins singing madrigals far better than yesterday's minstrel encore. Mid-morning drizzle turns to steady rain. Cloaks darken. Lady Margaret's hood wilts like an oversteeped lavender sprig. You spot a wayside inn, the Swan and Stirrup, and call for hiatus. Inside, rushes squelch underfoot releasing ale-scented steam. The innkeeper, cheeks crimson as quince jelly, offers hot posset flavored with cinnamon and, he brags, newly imported nutmeg. Mainstream fact slides onto the trestle. Nutmeg prices in the 1570s rivaled gold by weight, fueling courtly bragging rights and a few knife fights in spice wharves. You savor one cautious sip, knees warming along with morale. While mugs clink, a weather-beaten peddler unfurls cloth scraps printed with woodcut saints. He whispers that each scrap, if sewn into a pillow, wards off nightmares featuring horned beasts and unpaid taxes. Lady Margaret arches an eyebrow. The steward asks bulk rates. You grin. If hornbeast dreams involve codpiece bears, the pillow market is yours. Joke number 3 scribbles itself. Between nettle balm, valerian tea, and saint-stuffed cushions, insomnia doesn't stand a candle tax chance. Rain eases by sext. You remount the rolling Lena bed, now protected by a hastily rigged oilcloth awning that smells faintly of fish, probably last hauled herring. The road home threads past a half-ruined priory, ivy crawling where monks once queued for matins. Open scholarly debate wanders by. Historians still argue whether local devotion faded after Henry's dissolution or simply relocated to parish parlors. You imagine refugees from vanished cloisters tugging their memories into places like Lady Margaret's Manor, repurposing prayer habits the way your carpenter repurposes wheelbarrows. Around mid-afternoon you crest the ridge overlooking familiar fields. Smoke spirals from the manor chimneys, rosemary and peat, home's unofficial flag. The peacock, sensing incoming audience, struts along the orchard wall, tail glimmering like wet tapestry. He unleashes one clarion call as if to herald your triumphant return, or to ask who authorized the new rolling throne. Inside the gate, servants cheer the bedraggled pilgrims. The cook hustles bowls of leek and parsley broth so fragrant even rain-damp cloaks perk up. You dismount the lean bed, knees alighting with surprising buoyancy, proof of either nettle efficacy or nutmeg placebo. Lady Margaret presents the inn's spice bill and sighs. Candle tax gloom now has a nutmeg-shaped sidekick. Before Vespers, you retreat to the solar to jot pilgrimage reflections in the Book of Hours' generous margins. Ink flows beside violets pressed flat between pages. Notes on Saint scraps, posset recipes, and the rolling throne's velocity, average, 2 psalms per furlong. Candle guttering reminds you of inventory duty. You tally 4 tapers burned today, scribble replace with rushlights before tax. In chapel, the priest adds a pilgrimage thanksgiving to Psalm 121. You stand rather than kneel, partly to honor still damp hose, partly to highlight your carpenter's barrow innovation now parked near St. George. Candlelight flickers across the dragonhead brackets, throwing playful shadows that make the lance seem to twitch alive. Compline completes the circle. As the final Amen fades, you catch Lady Margaret whispering with the steward. They're calculating cost savings if everyone sleeps an hour earlier to avoid taxed illumination. You vow secret lantern bracket tests for loopholes. After all, sacred glow might yet dodge the exchequer's quill. Back in your chamber, rabbit slippers await, heroically dry. You swap rain-soaked hose for woolen stockings chilled but not cowed. Pig bladder bottle radiates comfort. Tonight infused with lemon balm and a flick of nutmeg, culinary souvenir turned nightcap. You smear nettle balm under a violet petal as what old Will would call herbal harmony. Then sink into the mattress, straw sighing gratitude that you didn't wheel it to the shrine. Rain resumes, gentler now, pattering a lullaby on the steadfast roof. You close your eyes, replaying carriage-thrown experiments, cinnamon steam, and ivy-draped ruins humming forgotten lauds. Somewhere down the corridor, the rolling Lena bed squeaks as the carpenter tweaks axle angles for speed trials. Tomorrow, perhaps, a psalm per half furlong. Lulled by rain, herbs, and that improbable goal, you drift towards sleep, confident your knees will file glowing reports and your dreams, Saint Scrap guarded, will be blissfully horned beast-free. You wake before dawn, roused not by peacock brass, but by the distinctive plink-plunk of raindrops hitting the carpenter's new wheelbarrow throne parked below your window. The rhythmic drip works better than any lute lullaby, yet curiosity nibbles harder than sleep, so you swing out of bed, rabbit slippers guarding against floorboard chill. Knees rise without complaint, clearly nettle balm, pilgrimage pacing, and rideshare psalm stretches have earned you a 5-star joint rating. Joke number 1 offers a high 5. If the exchequer tax smugness, you'd owe more than for candles. Dressing by half-moon light, you remember the incoming illumination levy. Determined to squeeze every groat of brightness from pre-tax mornings, you pad to the courtyard while stars still freckle the sky. There, the carpenter hunches over a pot hung from a spit, rendering yesterday's goose trimmings into fat. He plans to soak peeled rushes and fill the manor stores before the levy bites. Mainstream fact glows in the coals. Most Tudor households made rushlights by dipping dried marsh stems into tallow, a thrifty alternative to beeswax that smelled faintly like dinner's leftovers. You volunteer as Suluminarian, slicing reeds with a knife nicknamed Saint Candlesaver. Warm goose aroma wafts upward. Suddenly the fasting breakfast feels like a missed memo. To distract your stomach, you chat about the mobile Lena bed's axle upgrade. The carpenter grins, reveals a sketch of clock-style gears he hopes will let the next iteration glide uphill with one gentle push. A psalm escalator, he quips. Joke number 2 snickers. Once Fitbit merges with scripture, monks will boast about stairway to heaven step counts as dawn pinks the horizon. Old Will wanders by clutching a glass jar dotted with pinholes. Inside, green sparks flicker. Glowworms gathered from the orchard bank. He claims they're nature's tax-free nightlights. Clamp the jar to a bedpost, and you can read without paying a farthing. Quirky tidbit locked. Medieval bestiaries praised lantern worms for guiding lost shepherds, though Will mostly likes that they don't drip grease on linens. Historians still argue whether glowworm lanterns lit Tudor nurseries or lived solely in fireside brag stories, but you slip the jar onto the rushlight table anyway. Dual system resilience. Breakfast bell rings. Inside the lesser hall, porridge simmers, sweetened not with honey, too dear after spice binge, but with diced apples from last week's forehead rub experiment. You sprinkle a pinch of cinnamon rescued from the inn posset and settle at the trestle where candle ledgers sprawl like battle maps. The steward enters, quill poised, ready to finalize ration charts. You propose a tiered system: beeswax for Sunday solemnities, goosefat rushes for weekdays, glowworm hourglass for insomniac scribes. He scratches notes, muttering about invertebrate allowances. Joke number 3 leaps across the parchment. Imagine auditors inspecting jars. Sorry, sir. That worm exceeds lumen quota. Post-breakfast, Lady Margaret summons you to the solar, parchment in hand. A decree from the diocesan bishop demands every manor register its devotional furniture. Apparently rumors of rolling lena beds reaching for parishes have stirred curiosity and mild alarm. You're tasked with drafting explanatory diagrams that label the contraption a pedagogical posture support. Quills out, you sketch oak slings, dragon head candle brackets, and a bold footnote. Reduces knee attrition by 37%. Empirical. Mainstream bureaucracy meets artisan flair. Somewhere a clerk will scratch his tonsure in wonder that mid-morning drizzle fades. You, the carpenter, and Lady Margaret will lean a bed Mark III to the orchard for inspection photos. Inked sketches, really, but angles matter. Peacocks supervise from the wall, tail shimmering its silent review. While the carpenter adjusts the lantern jaws, you test stability by reciting yesterday's pilgrimage psalm. Wind rustles leaves. Apples thunk to ground. Lena bed barely trembles. Victory. Old Will appears, waving another glowworm jar. He suggests strapping the insects onto the footboard as automatic night indicators. When they dim, time to douse candles. You ponder starting a nocturnal insect guild. Historians would definitely argue whether unionized worms hasten the Renaissance. Noontides tug the household to dinner, pea pottage, rye trencher, and a sliver of last night goose, candles strictly unlit because sunlight is still tax-exempt. The priest offers grace and a brief aside on Roman oil lamps, noting that early Christians sometimes floated wicks in saucers of olive oil to dodge imperial tariffs. Historians still debate whether such lamps were smuggler chic or just Mediterranean practicality, but the anecdote bolsters your glowworm defense. Sacred precedent meets creepy cute lighting. After the meal you lead a tax mitigation tour, checking each chamber's sconces. In Lady Margaret's study you find an ornate brass candelabrum shaped like twin mermaids. Each holds a taper socket and, conveniently, a gap wide enough for glowworm jars. You log the retrofit. In the chapel you and the carpenter tally 6 beeswax stumps. He whispers about inventing a candle mold with removable cores so one taper counts as many burn center refill loophole. You nod, though the ethics might require an extra psalm or 2. Twilight sidles encloaked with cold. The first batch of goosefat rushlights dries in racks, stems shining like slender ivory swords. You light one to test brightness. The flame flickers steady, scent faintly Sunday roast. Lady Margaret inhales, smiles, declares the taxman can keep his quills. This household's light will taste delicious rebellion. Vespers gathers in chapel golden with new rushlights. The priest, impressed, blesses the culinary illumination and weaves a homily about letting one's light so shine, even under fiscal burdens. You, reclined in Lena bed, nearly snort aloud. Light shining has never smelled so appetizing. Peacocks stay respectful. Perhaps grease aroma triggers napping memories. After prayers, supper is simple. Onion broth and flatbread, but everyone lingers, basking in rushlight glow that feels both thrifty and lavish. Conversation turns to tomorrow's experiments. Will wants to test lumens versus worm glow. The carpenter eyes gearboxes. The steward grumbles but copies all into his ledger. Bureaucracy loves data, even scented. You retreat to your chamber. Rabbit slippers silent on shadowed planks lit by a single rushlight beside your bed. It sputters companionably. No tax yet. You apply token nettle balm. Habit's comfort. As glowworms flicker faint emerald from their jar on the stool. You open the book of hours to last night's notes and add one more. If light can be delicious, darkness can be savory, investigate. Candleless, you slide into blankets, pig bladder bottle warming calves, and let goose fat perfume lull you. Stars glimmer outside, worms glimmer within, and somewhere in the orchard the first experimental candle escalator gear clicks. Breath slows, jokes quiet, sleep descends tax-free, at least until dawn's audit. Muted gray dawn stretches across the rafters like wool carded thin, and a faint, savory perfume of yesterday's goose-fat rushlights lingers in the chill air. You surface slowly, nose greeting the scent before your eyes focus, and for a drowsy heartbeat you wonder whether you've woken inside the manor kitchen. But no, this is your chamber, glowworm jar pulsing a sleepy emerald on the stool. Rabbit slippers awaiting their call to heroism. You wriggle toes, register that the nettle balm has kept both knees quiet, and whisper a private victory psalm. Joke number 1 rustles the blanket. Somewhere a Renaissance fitness guru is drafting 50 shades of leg lunges. Pray like you mean it. A single rushlight guttering in the wall sconce reminds you that pre-tax mornings are premium light hours. So you shuffle up, slip into the slippers, and set about your newest crusade, documenting exactly how many lumens one glowworm emits. The steward, ever the ledger lizard, wants hard numbers before he'll reclassify worms as portable devotional devices. You collect the jar, stride through the hush of corridors where goose-fat torches now hang cold and satisfied, and ease into the courtyard. Dawn is only beginning to stain the sky-bruised lilac. Dew flashes everywhere, catching stray wormlight like secret Morse code. Old Will is already outside, half invisible within his greatcoat, stirring up a small brazier to keep his hands warm. He shows you 2 additional jars arranged side by side, control group and experimental group, then unrolls a measuring stick marked not in inches but in psalm lines, inspired by yesterday's rolling lean-a-bed velocity test. Mainstream historical fact drops gently into conversation. Tudor scholars, lacking precise clocks, sometimes measured time by standard prayers. The Ave Maria, for instance, timed bread bakes in convent kitchens. Well, figures if chance can cook bread, they can certainly rate insects. You position the jars on a bench, count how many psalm lines of brightness they cast before dawn fully blooms, and record figures onto a scrap of parchment fragrant with dried thyme. Joke number 2 glimmers. Congratulations, you're now the proud owner of a medieval smart bulb and the user manual fits on half a garnish. Experiment complete. You and will retreat to the lesser hall for breakfast. The cook serves oatcakes with blackberry compote, lavender-free by popular petition, and offers a new thrift beverage, roasted barley coffee. Brown as last year's candle stumps and almost, but not quite, convincing. You sip, catalog the taste, toasted hay flirting with charred walnut, and note that it pairs nicely with jokes about budget cuts. Meanwhile, Lady Margaret unfurls the bishop's response to yesterday's lean-a-bed diagrams. He blesses the concept in principle but questions whether dragonhead brackets might excite vain curiosity. Historians still argue whether ecclesiastic authorities genuinely feared decorative beasts or used them as convenient excuses to curb artisan flamboyance. You mentally draft a version carved with plain lilies for ecclesial peace. Mid-morning assignments scatter the household. You draw candle tax compliance duty again, this time mapping every glowworm station to prove equal light distribution. Perching a glowworm jar atop the mermaid weather vane proves tricky. The jar keeps sliding tail first. You give up, hang it by a twine sling, and whisper to the mermaid to guard her new night light with maritime devotion. A quirky tidbit floats in on the breeze. Sailors once nailed polished fish scales to mastheads as improvised reflectors. Some swore those silvery chips guided them during moonless passages. Your fishy lamp rig feels suddenly in good company on your way down. The peacock struts beneath, tail unfurled to its full kaleidoscopic splendor, demanding your admiration. You salute with exaggerated formality. Joke number 3 twirls a feather. If the tax collectors ever levy color, this bird will bankrupt the manor within a week. Rain threatens again by sext, puffing clouds that smell of iron and damp earth. You duck into the scriptorium, where the carpenter has set up his gear prototypes under the pretense of copying psalms. Tiny wooden cogs click inside an oak frame. He claims they'll let the Lena bed rock gently during vigils, lulling penitents while maintaining vertical posture. You picture novices snoring softly in rhythmic sways and chuckle. The priest peers in, purses his lips, and offers the open scholarly debate phrase of the day. Historians still argue whether medieval choir stalls' hinged misericords encouraged prayerful focus or covert catnaps. Everyone looks at the new gears and grins, a clear vote for the snooze-friendly theory. Dinner, still the main midday meal, features pottage brightened with that elusive angelica at last, alongside slabs of barley bread toasted under fresh rushlights. The steward reads out yesterday's glowworm test results, announcing that 1 jar equals 2 verses of the Magnificat at 10 paces. Numbers settle the argument. Lady Margaret authorizes glowworm jars for personal chambers, saving precious beeswax for holy days. You add lumens by Magnificat to your growing glossary of Tudor measurements, right beside distance per psalm line and kneel time in paternosters. After dishes, the afternoon horizon splits with a sunbeam daring to exist between rain gusts. Lady Margaret proposes a stroll to assess storm damage in the herb beds and invites you, the carpenter, and, unavoidably, the peacock. The bird agrees on condition of front position strutting rights. Out in the beds you find rosemary still soldiering, lavender predictably triumphant, but nettles flattened like penitent monks. You harvest a few bedraggled stalks for tonight's balm, promising the plants a resurrection arc halfway back. Thunder rumbles. Everyone breaks into a dignified trot, except the peacock who treats raindrops as paparazzi flashbulbs and launches onto a windowsill, shrieking stage directions. You reach shelter just as skies open, fat drops hammering the leaded glass. Inside, rushlights flare to compensate for storm dimness, untaxed for the moment, casting gold puddles that dance across oak panels. You breathe in the mingled aroma of tallow, wet wool, and angelica-tinged steam rising from cooling pottage pots. Comfort distilled. Vespers arrives with rain still drumming overhead. The choir benches feel damp along the edges, so you volunteer the Lena bed for the priest, citing ecclesiastical product testing. He steps in reluctantly, gears whirring. The bracket lantern glows, and as Psalm 104 begins, the device rocks at sailboat gentleness. Half the household sways in sympathy, eyes half closed, voices mellow as mink fur. You remain standing nearby at honest attention in case something snaps, but the gears hold. Candlelight strokes St. George's lance until it glitters like fresh fish scales. Another nod to maritime light lore. Compline follows with unusual brevity, perhaps to beat candle tallies. The moment prayers end, storm gutters outside gargle with overflow. Servants hurry to set basins under chronic leaks, but your chamber roof merely sighs, a reminder of successful moss caulking weeks ago. You duck inside, rabbit slippers finding their roost, glowworm jar perched on the stool like a tiny green hearth. Nettle balm, goosefat rushlight, and pig bladder bottle, tonight's sporting cloves for warmth, complete the bedtime checklist. You open the Book of Hours for one last margin note. Glowworms equal 2 Magnificat verses at 10 paces, repeat trials on moonless night. Then, quill down, rushlight pinched, glowworm glow sufficient, you nestle into straw. Rain softens, joints unwind, and the gentle mechanical sigh of gears somewhere down the hall promises that someone, maybe the priest himself, is already rocking into dreamland. You smile, slip beneath the lavender tide, and drift away. No candle tax incurred. No peacock protest audible. Just the soft, tax-free luminescence of worms guiding you toward tomorrow's yet-to-be-measured morning. The dawn that wakes you this morning feels like a stage manager yanking open the curtains 5 minutes early. Pale, insistent, a little nervy. Today is inspection day, first sweep by the Crown's brand-new illumination assessors. You've rehearsed speeches, polished the glowworm jars, even taught the peacock to keep his opinions to a dignified coo. Knees bend, creak politely, then hush. Nettle balm is clearly angling for sainthood. Joke number 1 pokes its head out from under the blanket. If Parliament ever taxes enthusiasm, this manor will be bankrupt before matins. You slip into rabbit slippers, tiptoe past the still-fading rushlight, and head to the courtyard where Old Will has arranged a brightness obstacle course. 6 glowworm jars stand on barrels, each capped with lantern chimneys scavenged from retired candlesticks. When you asked why chimney tops, he shrugged and said, "Optics." Mainstream fact confirms his intuition. Tudor glassmakers sometimes recycled broken crown glass panes into small domestic reflectors, boosting scant light without adding flame. Think medieval upcycling, minus corporate buzzwords. Inside, the cook ladles barley porridge kissed with apple and a daring sprinkle of thyme. Angelica is resting today. Lady Margaret paces, brandishing a parchment that lists allowable units of nocturnal flame per hearth. You skim the fine print. Turns out glowworms count as livestock, not light sources, so the assessor can't charge a farthing. Joke number 2 grins. You've essentially invented tax-exempt lantern hamsters. Post-breakfast, the household splits into frantic subcommittees. The carpenter polishes Lena Bed Mark III until the dragon head brackets shimmer like sunrise in a knight's visor. The steward reinks ledgers describing lumen output in Magnificat verses. You, armed with a wad of beeswax, patch any seam that might betray secret rushlight stashes. As you kneel to seal a crack beside the chapel door, you discover window panes cut from translucent cow bladder, the Tudor answer to frosted glass. Quirky tidbit acquired. Some households dyed these membranes pale blue so moonlight looked holier. You file that under future ambience hacks. Near terse, a clatter of hooves signals the assessor's arrival. He dismounts, hat dripping drizzle, face set to bureaucratic default. You greet him with deferential nods, ushering him first to the scriptorium. Bright as dawn thanks to 2 strategically placed glowworm jars magnified by salvaged mirror shards. He peers, squints, consults his checklist, then harumphs. You launch into your prepared patter about bioluminescent stewardship. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan officials truly understood natural phosphorescence or simply pretended when paperwork looked impressive. Judging by his blank stare, the debate lives on. Next stop, chapel. The priest, standing in Lena Bed, recites Psalm 27 while gentle gears rock him like a ship at anchor. Only 1 beeswax taper burns. The rest of the glow comes from dragon bracket reflectors and, high above, a twinkling jar tied to the rood screen. The assessor circles, counts, circles again. You hand him the magnified lumen chart. He grunts, scribbles, moves on. Joke number 3 whispers from your shoulder. Apparently numbers sung in Latin are harder to tax. In the great hall the carpenter unveils his newest sabotage. Pewter dinner plates hung on walls, tilted to bounce hearth light twice as far. The assessor places a thumb under one, measuring nothing in particular, then marks pending beside decorative reflectors. Lady Margaret offers him barley coffee. He declines, perhaps fearing taxable warmth. Inspection rolls to the solar where the Book of Hours lies open beneath a glowworm sconce. The assessor pokes the jar. The worm glows brighter, he recoils. Then coughs, straightens, and proclaims the manor technically compliant. He does, however, warn that future statutes may address excessive insect luminescence. You keep a straight face until his boots clack out the gate, then exhale a giggle that smells faintly of victory and time. Afternoon breaks into celebratory bustle. The cook fries slivers of pancake in goose fat. The drippings of rebellion taste delicious. The priest quotes St. Augustine on light and truth. The carpenter sketches Lena Bed Mark IV featuring a mirror canopy to double holiness by reflection. You stroll through corridors noting how glow flickers on bladder windows, deciding blue-dyed panes could turn the hallway into twilight even at noon. Sleep-inducing upgrade for the chronic insomniacs. Rain lifts by none, leaving sky startled blue. You escort Old Will to the orchard for worm release rotation. Sustainable lighting requires ethical husbandry. Rooks jeer overhead, perhaps miffed their dawn shift lost to invertebrates. Will deposits tired glowworms on moist leaves. Collects fresh recruits, and shares a rumor that some apothecaries dry worms as aphrodisiacs. Historians still argue whether that trade existed or was just tavern hyperbole. You hope it's hype. Love potions and utility lighting should never mix billing codes. Back indoors, twilight sidles earlier now, autumn creeps. Rushlights sprout in sconces, aroma closer to Sunday roast than beeswax chapel hush. Vespers begins. You recline in lean bed, candle bracket empty tonight. Pure glowworm glow plus pewter ricochet. Psalm 141 rises. Voices mellow, echoing against reflective plates with an almost choral reverb. The priest's homily reminds all that God's first miracle in Genesis was light, untaxed, and unlimited. Several heads nod in spiritual and fiscal agreement. Compline follows after a supper of lentil stew boosted with leftover cinnamon dust. You volunteer to extinguish hall torches early. Every snuffed flame feels like pocketing a coin. In your chamber, one rushlight burns nearby, but you challenge yourself to rely solely on jar glow. The emerald glimmer paints the book of hours letters sea green. Margin notes compare candle tallies, glowworm lifespans, and the assessor's mustache curvature, purely observational scholarship, of course. Pig bladder bottle radiates warmth, spice tonight with a shaving of nutmeg, luxury still legal when hidden in bedtime thermodynamics. You smear nettle balm, arch knees, no complaint, then exhale into darkness softer than velvet prayer cushions. Somewhere down the hall gears sigh as the priest steps out of lean bed, perhaps newly convinced that moderate rocking equals deeper devotion. The mermaid vane creaks in night breeze, glowworm sling swinging like a lantern at sea. You close your eyes, listing today's small triumphs. Tax spared, worms promoted, peacock silent, for once, knees serene, angelica still a flavor not a fine. Sleep rises like quiet tide, lifted by time porridge aftertaste and the gentle certainty that tomorrow's dawn will find your lamps lit by creatures too tiny for royal ledgers, your prayers buoyed by cushions too clever for pain, and your jokes queued neatly between psalms, waiting to kneel and chuckle again beneath Tudor stars. Sunrise steals in shyly, tinting frost-rimmed window panes with rose as delicate as a marigold petal. And for a dreamy moment you wonder if someone painted dawn to match yesterday's porridge garnish. You inhale. The air tastes of chimney peat, sleepy lavender, and a mischievous hint of cloves. The cook must be trial-running spice-light recipes before any new levy lands. Joke number 1 rouses itself. When Parliament taxes aromas, this manor's ledgers will implode in a puff of rosemary-scented smoke. You slip from bed, knees unfolding with barely a murmur. Proof nettle balm and lean bed ergonomics deserve honorary knighthoods. Rabbit slippers carry you across reeds newly strewn with winter savory to discourage mice. Old Will's latest tactic. In the lesser hall you find Lady Margaret studying 2 parchments. One stamped Crown Spice Duty Proposal, the other an illuminated calendar showing tonight's vigil schedule. She sighs, calls both necessary evils, then hands you a cup of barley coffee, brightened by surprise. Grated nutmeg while it's still semi-affordable. Breakfast is humble. Rye heel drizzled with honey and a single poached egg from hens convinced longer nights mean holiday overtime. As you chew, the steward reads aloud a London pamphlet warning that clove imports may soon be restricted to licensed apothecaries. Mainstream fact steps forward. The Tudor Privy Council often rationed prized spices during wartime to maintain royal medicine chests, leaving common kitchens scrambling for flavor. Lady Margaret mutters that flavor is morale, not treason, and you raise your mug in agreement. After clearing trenchers, you and the carpenter inspect Lena Bed Mark III for its All Saints cameo. He's added a detachable foot warmer carved from cedar so the priest's toes won't turn to icicles mid-litany. You run a hand over the wood, inhaling sweet resin. Cedar was prized for keeping moths from vestments. A quirky tidbit the carpenter claims is 2 miracles for the price of 1. Joke number 2 taps his chisel. If the exchequer discovers pest control counts as tax reduction, cedar forests will vanish overnight. Mid-morning finds you in the herb garden gathering evergreens. Rosemary, bay, juniper, to weave vigil garlands. Your knees sink into damp soil with cooperative grace, letting you snip low branches without yelping. At the gate old will appears brandishing a bundle of dried rowan berries, insisting they thwart wandering spirits attracted by All Saints' bells. Historians still argue whether Rowan's reputation stems from pre-Christian folklore or clever berry merchants upselling red beads. But you accept the branch. Better safe than haunted. Back inside, you plait garlands while the cook simmers spiced apple musk for tonight's warming draft. Steam coils through the hall, and nostalgia twines with it. Remember the first time-laden porridge and that infamous mint monopoly? You smile at the scent's gentle evolution. Meanwhile, the steward drafts a spice audit rebuttal, citing the manor's modest consumption, measured in cups of virtuous cheer rather than pounds. You slip him your tally of nutmeg shavings per week, data for the defense. Noon dinner doubles as a planning council. Menu: pea pottage laced with safe harbor angelica and a modest shard of ginger, for memory of better tariffs. Over the meal, the priest explains that All Saints' vigils in earlier centuries sometimes stretched from dusk to dawn, candles blazing all night. Tonight, however, light must ration. You suggest rotating glowworm jars between psalm cycles. He nods, admiration twinkling behind scholarly concern. Joke number 3 scampers across the table. If saints can handle martyrdom, they can surely cope with mood lighting. After dishes, you and Lady Margaret prepare the chapel. Rushlights line the aisle at 6-pace intervals, beeswax reserved for altar and choir. You hang rosemary garlands above St. George, who seems pleased, lance catching emerald glow from a jar perched nearby. The priest rehearses the litany while standing in lean bed, cedar foot warmer emitting faint forest perfume. Listening, you reflect on an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether late medieval laypeople understood every Latin phrase or simply rode the rhythm toward transcendence. Kneeling or reclining, tonight you'll gladly ride the wave. Dusk arrives early, folded in slate clouds. The household gathers for a light supper. Barley bread, cheese, and a sip of spiced apple must to prime throats for chanting. Outside, wind claws at shutters. Inside, glowworms flicker like solemn fireflies guarding sacred hush. When the priest intones the opening antiphon, you settle into the first pew to coordinate jar rotation. Each 20 verses, you exchange a dim jar for a fresh one, marking margins in the Book of Hours. Glow Cycle 1, Psalm 34, Brightness Fair. Cedar warmth drifts from lean bed, mixing with lavender smoke at mid-vigil. A draft snuffs a rushlight near the rude screen. Before panic spreads, you recall the salvaged reflector trick. Tilting a pewter plate bounces altar flame across the gap, saving another taper and another coin. Lady Margaret catches your eye, nods approval. Stewardship is its own liturgy as the vigil enters matins. Fatigue nibbles edges of attention. You rub nettle balm into knees beneath wool to kindle wakefulness. The sting snaps you upright just as the choir begins the Te Deum. Voices sail upward, reflecting off mirror shards and dragon brackets in a mosaic of sound. You realize you're witnessing architecture, herbs, insects, and ingenuity quilting holiness into the night. No excess, no waste, just layered grace. Toward dawn, final psalms fade. You extinguish jars one by one, whispering thanks to each worm before releasing it into a potted bay tree by the porch. Bioluminescent benedictions. The priest steps from lean bed, toes toasty, smile serene. Outside, eastern sky blushes. Garlands glisten with dew. Rosemary breath mingles with first light. Breakfast is graciously postponed. Instead, everyone collapses onto benches sipping barley coffee while the cook stirs porridge for later. You jot fresh margin notes. Cedar warmer success. Reflector plate essential. Rowan berries. No hauntings detected. The steward peeks, adds glowworm cycle efficient, then draws a tiny star. You laugh softly, tuck quill away. Back in your chamber, pig bladder bottle waits fragrant with chamomile angelica infusion. You slip rabbit slippers aside, stretch gingerly yet pain-free, marvel again at knees transformed from creaky relics to supple psalm counters. The Book of Hours opens easily. You add one last line. Light can dwindle yet devotion amplify. Rushlight out, glowworm faint but loyal. You nest into straw. The peacock, moved by vigil hush, offers only a muted chirrup before roosting. Sleep drapes over you like those rustling rosemary garlands, scented with resilience. In dream corridors, saints nod approval, glowworms spell Magnificat verses, and spice merchants haggle kindly with tax men who arrive distracted by nettle balm samples. You smile in slumber, ready for whatever tariff, tincture, or joke tomorrow's daylight delivers to your ever-steady, herb-anointed knees. Dawn wakes late, as though it, too, overslept after the All Saints' vigil. Pale lemon light seeps through cowbladder panes dyed faint blue, tinting your chamber with a twilight illusion that almost tricks you back under the blankets. Instead, you sit up, finding the pig bladder bottle still warm at your calves and the nettle balm jar loyally standing guard. Knees flex with nothing more than a courteous click, proof that cedar foot warmers, glowworm shifts, and rowan rosemary garlands add up to excellent joint diplomacy. Joke number 1 salutes. You've basically crowdfunded a medieval physiotherapy clinic without realizing it. You pad into the corridor wearing rabbit slippers and yesterday's humility. The rushlight in the sconce is a mere stub, but that's perfect. Post-levy frugality now doubles as spiritual discipline. Downstairs, the lesser hall smells of barley coffee, baked apples, and a daring swirl of cloves. One last pre-tariff flourish. Lady Margaret sits at the trestle flanked by 2 visitors. A parish beadle brandishing a scroll of poor law amendments, and a traveling tinker whose cart jingles with battered pots and improbable gossip. Mainstream fact arrives with the beadle's lecture. The 1572 poor law requires parishes to collect alms for the impotent poor, branding vagabonds with a hot iron if they refuse honest work. Rural manors like yours must now report labor shortages and spare scraps. You sip faux coffee and promise to draft lists after breakfast, silently noting that even glowworms earn honest keep these days. The tinker, however, steals the spotlight by whispering news of a comet seen over Kent, tail bright as a molten sword. He opens a pouch, revealing a sliver of greenish stone he claims fell from the sky and wards off toothache. Quirky tidbit pocketed. Some Tudor physicians pulverized meteoritic starstone to treat melancholy, though historians still argue whether patients felt better from cosmic minerals or from telling neighbors they'd swallowed the heavens. You volunteer to escort both men to the scriptorium, beadle for records, tinker for warm cider, because the carpenter is busy fitting Lena Bed Mark III with quieter gears after last night's creaks echoed during the Te Deum. Along the way, the peacock struts across your path, tail half-mast in dignified exhaustion after his vigil-induced vow of near silence. You bow. He inclines his head, accepting your apology for yesterday's pewter reflector that briefly flashed him in the eye. Joke number 2 fans a feather. If peacocks issued fines for light pollution, you'd owe more than the exchequer and the scriptorium. You unroll fresh parchment and begin listing parish dependents. Widowed Dame Alice, who spins flax, 3 orphan siblings apprenticed to the dairy, and the gloomy cat whom Lady Margaret argues qualifies as emotional livestock. The beadle raises an eyebrow but keeps writing. Bureaucracy is allergic to humor. While ink dries, the tinker examines glowworm jars lining the windowsill. Green lanterns, eh? He mutters, proposing to swap your brightest specimen for a pewter ladle shaped like a mermaid. Tempting, but worms are tax strategy. You decline with regret. Mid-morning brings drizzle and the cooks shout that oatcakes are ready. Everyone convenes in the great hall where cedar smoke lingers and the tinker spins tales of Spanish galleons bulging with nutmeg islands. Each tree drips gold spice, he insists. You and Lady Margaret trade skeptical looks. Open scholarly debate arrives on cue. Historians still argue whether chronicler Richard Hakluyt embellished Atlantic spice rumors to lure investors or simply repeated sailor tavern yarns. The peacock, roosting on a beam, squawks as if to say, "Research your sources." After oatcakes, you help Old will transplant foxgloves beside the chapel path. Part beauty, part apothecary prep, since foxglove leaves in cautious doses steady faltering hearts. Legs bend, soil squelches, knees remain drama-free. Will shares that some folk scatter foxglove petals on threshing floors to make evil spirits slip, a safety hazard disguised as exorcism. Joke number 3 dusts itself off. OSHA would like a word with medieval demon busters. Noon dinner, still the day's heaviest meal, features pottage revved up with the last legal pinch of clove, plus barley bread and a slab of cheese streaked blue as twilight windows. The steward reads aloud the tinker's comet gossip. The priest responds that comets once signaled doom. Yet St. Bede viewed them as stars with dreadlocks. Everyone chuckles, tension thawed by dairy fat and folklore. You jot dreadlock star into your book of hours margin, potential lullaby lyric. After dishes, Lady Margaret drafts a poor law reply. You accompany her to the tithe barn to assess grain surplus. Inside, barn cats prowl rafters, eyeing mice who ignore new winter savory rushes. You tally sacks while explaining glowworm metrics to a puzzled Reeve. Magnificat verses per jar, psalm lines per lumen. He nods slowly, as if deciphering alchemical code. Outside, rain pauses, and sun spears through a knothole, spotlighting the green meteor shard in the tinker's pouch. He presses it into your palm for science, urging you to test its toothache powers on the next complaining pilgrim. Late afternoon, the carpenter summons you to witness Lenabed's hush upgrade. He's lined gear teeth with strips of lambskin parchment, soft, durable, and previously used for a discarded homily draft. Mounting the sling, you lean back. The frame rocks smoother than a canal barge skimming glass water. Psalms per sway doubled, he proclaims. You promise to log it at tonight's vespers. Twilight glows amber on cedar panels. The cook serves humble supper, onion broth and rye crescents, pointedly spice-free, a protest menu until Parliament relents. You sprinkle a single celery seed in solidarity. The peacock sneezes theatrically. Vespers begins under glowworm light and a solitary beeswax taper for the gospel. You recline in the silenced Lena bed. The priest chants Psalm 147, voice echoing softly off foxglove fresh stone. During the reading, you tuck the comet pebble into your pocket, half skeptic, half stargazer. Perhaps it will guard against candletax headaches if not toothaches. Post-prayer, you volunteer for night watch with old Will Charge, ensuring no gust snuffs essential rushlights. Outside, air smells of wet straw and distant smoke. You pace cloisters, counting worms, adjusting pewter reflectors, marveling at how even drizzle seems luminous under emerald flickers. Will murmurs skylore. Comets, he says, pull tidings on silver chains. Maybe this one drags cheaper spice tariffs behind it. You both laugh, breath fogging into hopeful ghosts. When your watch ends, you return to the chamber. Rabbit slippers greet frost-chilled toes. Pig bladder bottle radiates with lemon balm brew, safe from duty lists so far. You smear nettle balm in a perfunctory encore, then hold the meteor sliver to the glowworm jar. Green meets green, a tiny aurora inside glass. You press stone to an untroubled molar, no miracle yet, but no harm. The book of hours lies open where you left it. You add tonight's margin, comet stone gift, lambskin gear successful, spices rationed but morale intact. Quill down, rush light pinched, jar light sufficient. You sink beneath the blanket. Far away, thunder rumbles. A sky drum for dreadlock stars. You smile, knees cozy, joints mute, jokes gently filed for morning. Sleep settles, spiced with faint clove memory, foxglove dreams, comet hope, and, somewhere beyond shutters, a peacock rehearsing a tasteful dawn solo. Tax-free, for now. A pale sun rises behind thin November fog, and its wan beams trickle through blue-dyed cowbladder panes, tinting your palate in dusky sapphire. You stretch beneath the blanket, knees greeting the dawn with only a courteous click, an almost affectionate reminder that nettle balm, cedar foot warmers, and nightly lean-a-bed sessions have forged a détente between cartilage and devotion. Joke number 1 yawns in the corner. If Tudor infomercials existed, you'd be the before and after model holding a jar of saintly joint juice. The manor moves quietly. Today is All Souls' Eve, a day for remembering every departed villager whose names linger like half-faded ink in the parish register. Down the corridor, the peacock issues a single, respectful croak. Apparently, even feathered divas grasp solemnity when ancestral spirits might be eavesdropping. You don rabbit slippers and follow the waft of barley coffee, sweetened with the final legal pinch of nutmeg before spice duty's hammer falls. Lady Margaret greets you at the trestle, eyes shadowed from vigil prep yet sparkling with purpose. She spreads a slate of tasks: soul cake baking, lantern audits, and, most pressing, transcribing the newly arrived homily on purgatory. 9 pages of dense Latin you'll help illuminate with margin doodles of glowworms wearing halos. Breakfast arrives. Rye trenchers layered with apple butter and a single clove pressed dead center, like culinary punctuation. While you chew, the priest shares a mainstream fact. During late medieval All Souls vigils, households baked round soul cakes, gifting them to the poor who promise to pray for each donor's deceased. The practice, he notes, predates trick-or-treating by centuries. The cook perks up. Suddenly her oven schedule feels historically righteous. Task 1. You join her in the kitchen. Cinnamon smoke mingles with yeast, and dough circles puff under goose-fat glaze. A quirky tidbit surfaces when she sprinkles each cake with 3 currants, for Father, Son, and Holy Glowworm. Supposedly, she whispers, leftover cakes placed beneath pillows guarantee dreams of departed relatives, offering stock tips on spring planting. Historians still argue whether the dream payoff was literal prophecy or simply indigestion manifesting as Uncle Gerard in a Turnipfield cameo. You decide to test the theory later, stomach willing. Bells toll terse, you shift to the chapel inventory. Beeswax tapers numbered and locked, rushlights trimmed, glowworm jars refreshed. The carpenter unveils Lena bed Mark 3.5, now draped in black cloth trimmed with white braid. Liturgical chic that Lady Margaret dubs formal recline. Joke number 2 slicks its hair. Soon you'll be selling front row seats to posture couture. Mid-morning fog dissolves, revealing frost-silvered hedges. You escort old Will to the orchard to gather crab apples for decorative wreaths. En route you pass villagers trudging up the lane, baskets ready to trade prayers for cakes. One woman carries a hollowed turnip with a candle inside, the local soul lantern. She claims the flicker guides wandering spirits back to graves before sunrise. You jot the detail for your margin. Early jack-o'-lantern tech, turnip edition, BY sext. The courtyard smells of yeast, wood smoke, and rosemary. You hand out soul cakes, reciting, a cake, a prayer, a stair to heaven's air. While the steward tracks each loaf like it's crown bullion. Peasants thank you, promise rosaries, and slip away as church bells ring noon. Lady Margaret whispers a relief sigh. Spiritual bookkeeping is harder than spice audits. After the crowd disperses, you tackle homily transcription in the solar. Latin clauses twine like ivy, but you stay sharp by sipping barley brew laced with a microdust of clove. Civil disobedience in liquid form. Joke number 3 scribbles across the page. If the candle tax won't ruin eyesight, 20 Latin ablatives certainly will. Halfway through page for you doodle a tiny peacock kneeling with perfect posture under a caption. Remember last vigil's vow of quiet? Dusk creeps early. The cook ladles a light pottage flavored with hearty winter savory. Safe, legal, aromatic. Before vespers you slip outside to light the manor's row of soul lanterns. Hollowed apples stuffed with rush wicks soaked in cider dregs. Their glow reflects on frost, tiny amber portals welcoming any restless forebears. Open scholarly debate pops into mind. Historians still argue whether these humble lights symbolized purgatorial fires or merely kept drunk patrons from stumbling into ditches after curfew. Either way, the path looks enchantingly haunted. Inside, Vespers begins. The chapel, draped in black and silver, flickers with just 3 beeswax candles and a dozen glowworm jars hung like emerald constellations. You recline in formal recline, gears lambskin muffled, cedar foot warmer fragrant beneath wool. The priest chants Psalm 130, De Profundis, the cry, out of the depths, resonating against stone. You feel the sling rock, a lullaby with gravitas, and breathe a prayer for every name scratched in the parish death ledger. The moment stretches, warm as nettle tingle, chill as candle shadow. Mid-service candle rotation approaches. You swap a guttering taper for a glowworm jar, noting in your ledger, emergency substitution, followed by a smiley face the assessor will never see. Nearby, the peacock perches on the rude loft, tail closed out of respect, though one iridescent feather gleams like stained glass aflame. Compline closes with haunting polyphony. Rowan's minstrel score, adapted for glowworm acoustics. Voices fade. Silence settles thick and sweet. You escort the priest from Lena bed, noting his surprised grin when cedar kept his toes toastier than purgatorial embers. He mutters about ordering 2 more before Advent. Market demand, confirmed. Supper time, truly a midnight snack, features barley buns and small beer. You slip an extra soul cake into your doublet for the pillow experiment, much to the steward's horror. Up in your chamber, glowworms pulse, Pig bladder bottle hums with chamomile juniper brew. Juniper recently exempted from spice talks. Hooray. You smear nettle balm, press the comet pebble to your molar, no ache yet, and place the soul cake beneath the pillow, currents aligned like compass points. Quill poised, you jot into the book of hours. All Souls Vigil complete. Turnip lanterns effective. Formal recline received rave reviews. You add a doodle. 3 currents orbiting a glowworm star. Rushlight snuffed. You slide beneath blankets as orchard lanterns shimmer through frosted glass. Somewhere the tinker's comet whispers past the roof ridge, silver dreadlocks sweeping away spice tariffs. One can dream. You close your eyes. The pillow smells of yeast, sugar, and theological speculation. Breath slows. Joints relax. Jokes cue for morning shift. If the dream prophecy legend holds, perhaps your late uncle will appear to discuss optimal pea plant spacing. If not, at least the cake's comforting heft may brace your neck like the gentlest of cedar pillows. Either way, you drift into darkness sweetened by cloves and hope, certain that souls both living and departed share one truth. Light, even rationed, multiplies when reflected through rosemary, rowan, and the patient heartbeat of glowworms. You wake with the taste of raisins and vague genealogy on your tongue, convinced you've just spent the night debating crop rotations with 3 generations of spectral aunties. The soul cake pillow experiment clearly delivered. Whether prophecy or pastry placebo is up for tomorrow's ledger debate. Before you can parse the details, the faint clatter of distant hooves and one indignant peacock shriek announce that dawn, like a tax collector, refuses to grant extensions. You sit up, knees behaving like well-bribed aldermen, and retrieve the flattened cake from beneath your pillow. One current is missing. Joke number 1 smirks. Either ancestral spirits take tips, or you're the kind of sleep snacker the Reformation warned about. Rabbit slippers in place, you pad to the narrow window. A pale gold sunbeam slips through the blue cowbladder pane and lands on the comet pebble resting atop your book of hours, setting its green flecks ablaze. You press it briefly against your molar, still no ache, then pocket it for field tests on the steward's chronic jaw complaints. Down the corridor, a rushlight sputters its final inch, reminding you that post-levy mornings demand candle frugality. You snuff it with fingers dampened from the water jug, whispering your ongoing mantra. Every flame saved is a glowworm raised. In the lesser hall, Lady Margaret presides over a breakfast council of oat groats and hot barley coffee. Her eyes shine with equal parts clove withdrawal and post-vigil satisfaction. She informs everyone that the parish has requested your lean-a-bed diagrams for potential choir stall retrofitting. Mainstream fact punctuates her announcement. Several cathedrals in late Tudor England experimented with misericords, fold-down seats designed to support standing monks, though none, she notes pointedly, rocked gently on lambskin gears. The carpenter almost drops his mug in pride. A courier then bursts in, cape dusted with frost, bearing a royal missive about the looming spice embargo. Merchants must register cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg inventories within 3 weeks, or face fines, calculated per dram. Joke number 2 coughs clove-scented sarcasm. So now your pantry needs its own bookkeeper. Lady Margaret delegates the new aromatics ledger to you, citing your proven skill at counting things that glow, burn, or smell expensive. After breakfast, you retrieve the half-used nutmeg kernel, weigh it on the apothecary scale, and enter the figure 1 1/4 households of porridge cheer. The steward peers, quill poised, and mutters that government clerks prefer avoirdupois, not metaphors. You add the grams in tiny script, promising to footnote the cheer conversion later. Mid-morning brings a knock from the tinker, back to barter. He's heard of your glowworm innovations and offers a battered astrolabe in exchange for a jar of those holy lightning bugs. Quirky tidbit materializes. He claims sailors once smeared crushed glowworms on compass needles for night-visible bearings. Historians still argue whether this was practical navigation or tavern mythology best enjoyed with strong ale. Tempted by the star-charting device, you haggle 1 jar plus an oatcake. Deal struck, you secure the astrolabe, already envisioning bedtime tutorials to map your comet's path. Just before sext, the cook requests your opinion on spiceless pea pottage. You suggest a dash of winter savory to fake Pepper's warmth. She obliges, and the test spoonful tastes surprisingly bold. You record it for the aromatics ledger under creative loopholes. While you stir, she confesses the gloomy cat has abandoned its toad poultice and now naps inside the still-warm bread oven, radiating such bliss that the kitchen staff renamed it Saint Toast. You note that as successful animal therapy, though the toad looks mortally offended, noon dinner doubles as a planning session for Advent. The priest outlines extra dawn masses. The carpenter proposes Lena Bed Mark IV, equipped with a hooded cowl to trap breath heat. A portable confessional meets duvet. Open scholarly debate floats across the table. Historians still argue whether early modern worshippers truly felt piety increased with discomfort or simply lacked ergonomic role models. You grin, chewing sage-dusted cheese, privately certain comfort and devotion can share a pew. After dishes you escort old Will to the south field to check early winter drainage. Frost crunches underfoot like crushed soul cakes, and your knees handle the uneven ruts without protest. Nettles rule. Will produces a pouch of dried foxglove petals, claiming they calm cattle if sprinkled in troughs. You arch an eyebrow. Last week they supposedly tripped demons. Joke number 3 tips its hat. Either foxglove is the Swiss Army knife of plants, or Will moonlights as a medieval marketing agency. Returning, you pass the peacock preening atop a water butt, tail iridescent in weak sun. You bow. He nods, still solemn from All Souls' vow. Small mercy. Inside, you retire to the solar to test the astrolabe near the frostbright window. Aligning its sights on the noon sun, you scratch angles onto scrap parchment and note the comet pebble glinting approvingly. Perhaps tonight you'll chart the dreadlock star's arc, assuming cloud cover behaves. Twilight sidles in early, and glowworm jars replace rushlights in corridors. Public relations, you joke in case another assessor visits. You supervise jar rotation, noting each worm's brightness in Magnificat verses. One particularly vigorous specimen earns promotion to Chapel Prime, a luminous corner behind St. George's Lance. Vespers begins under trim light. Pewter plates bounce glowworm emerald, formal recline cradles the priest, and cedar foot warmer breathes forest hush. During Psalm 62, you feel the sling's new lambskin gears glide soundlessly, double sway efficiency achieved. You whisper an internal cheer, promising to log data later. Compline follows a small supper of barley bread, onion broth, and a single slice of apple to honor last night's lanterns. After grace, Lady Margaret gifts you a token of gratitude. A small cedar box scented with rosemary, designed to store nettle balm and the comet pebble. She's carved a glowworm emblem on the lid, proof the manor's unofficial mascot crawls ever deeper into daily ritual. Back in your chamber, you file spices, write ledger numbers, and set the astrolabe on the sill star ready. The book of hours awaits. You add margins. Astrolabe acquired. Clove ledger begun. Foxglove rebranded. You tuck St. Toast's tale into the notes, just above your soul cake dream results. Then rushlight out, glowworm in, nettle balm applied, knees cozily mellow. Pig bladder bottle tonight steams with sageberry infusion. Warming, untaxed. You lie back, listening to distant gears sigh as the carpenter tinkers with cowl prototypes. Outside, frost breathes silver over orchards. Inside, green jarlight shimmers across the comet pebble, casting minuscule auroras on cedar walls. You inhale rosemary, exhale bureaucracy, and let eyelids drift closed. Dreams gather. A comet dragging spice freedom. A peacock earning choir solo. A cat toasted golden and purring in Latin. Light may be rationed, cloves counted, but between glowworms, ingenuity, and steadfast knees, darkness dissolves into something gentle, manageable, and just humorous enough to lull you toward tomorrow. The winter sun hangs low, more pearl than gold, when you pull the shutters and feel its shy glow skim across frost-etched glass. A quiet hush settles over the manor, as though every oak beam and rush-strewn floorboard knows tonight's ritual will close the long, meandering chapter of your Tudor sojourn. You swing your legs from the pallet. Knees rise without protest, those nettle-anointed veterans, and slip into rabbit slippers so practiced they practically guide you toward the day's last devotions. The soul cake crumb you left on the sill has vanished. Perhaps the spectral aunties returned for a snack and run encore. Joke number 1 winks. Next year you'll invoice the afterlife for catering fees. Downstairs, breakfast unfolds in reverent near silence. Barley coffee, now spiced only with a phantom memory of nutmeg, steams from earthen mugs. Lady Margaret hands you a single beeswax taper, one of the manor's final pre-levy reserves, and nods toward the chapel. For tonight, she whispers. Use it when the last glowworm dims. The weight of that taper feels ceremonial, rarer than gold. Morning work flows like a slow hymn. You join the carpenter in the solar to sand Lena Bed Mark Ivy's cedar hood, its curved panels ready to cradle winter breath and echoes of psalms yet unsung. He hums a lullaby written by Rowan the minstrel. The tune threads through sawdust motes, settling in beams like invisible garlands. Mid-song he reveals a fringe tidbit. Some Italian monasteries experimented with sleep cloisters, narrow alcoves where monks half sat, half stood through vigil hours. Historians still argue whether those niches promoted contemplation or spinal rebellion, but your hooded Lena bed looks poised to render the debate obsolete to be why terse. The cook beckons you to taste test Advent broth, parsnip, winter savory, and a dream of clove no bureaucrat can measure. You pronounce it heavenly. She slips you a wink. Joke number 2 simmers. You're now an accredited spice smuggler, your diploma written in steam. Mid-afternoon you fulfill one final poor law chore, escorting a basket of soul cakes to Dame Alice and the orphaned siblings. The road crunches under frost. Overhead, the comet the tinker loved to dramatize glints white against indigo, dreadlocks trailing into daylight. You tap the comet pebble in your pocket, half expecting it to warm like a grateful firefly. Instead, your knees ping with a friendly ache, reminding you a lifetime of kneeling can still whisper even on valedictory days. You rub nettle balm beneath cloak folds, an old secret handshake between herb and joint. Back at the manor, dusk drops like velvet. Rush lights line the corridors, their goose-fat flames steady but subdued. Glowworm jars gleam emerald at every turning. Old Will stations himself near the weather vane, monitoring wind for leaks. None dare spoil tonight. In the chapel, garlands woven from rosemary, juniper, and last week's rowan berries drape pew ends, their scent an herbarium of memories. Lavender-crowned pillows, time rebellions, foxglove rumors, and that indefatigable peacock now perched upon the rude screen in respectful silhouette. Compline merges with a closing vigil, the year's final, a distilled essence of every psalm you've voiced. You step into Lena Bed Mark IV, settling beneath the cedar hood. A hush hugs your shoulders. Candlelight dapples the curved wood like dawn through tall pines. The priest begins Psalm 121, Levavi oculos, and your voice threads alongside his, Latin syllables now muscle memory. The hood concentrates resonance. Words feel intimate, almost whispered straight to marrow mid-service. The last glowworm jar fades. You lift Lady Margaret's taper, strike flint, and watch honey-bright flame bloom in cupped hands. One by one you light the dragon head brackets. Not many, just enough to gild St. George's lance, the cedar hood's warm grain, and faces of fellow worshippers whose eyes gleam with gentle fatigue and gratitude. Joke number 3 flits across the flame. Congratulations. You've become the official keeper of the light, tax-approved, spiritually audited. The litany of saints unfurls. You sense every margin note, every doodled glowworm halo, every ledger entry of psalm verses per lumen converging into this sustained breath. When the priest pronounces the final amen, the chapel seems to exhale. Silence pools, rich and thick, broken only by a single, surprisingly soft peacock murmur. Part benediction, part curtain call. You exit the sling slowly, grateful footsoles meeting rushes scented by centuries of herbs. Lady Margaret presses a cedar box into your palm. Inside rests fresh nettle balm, a sprig of lavender, and the glowworm emblem carved in miniature. For whatever prayers come next, she says. You bow, words snagged in your throat like rose thorns yearning toward bloom. Corridors dim as torches wink out. Voluntary austerity now feels like luxury. In your chamber, frost feathers the window, but the pig bladder bottle radiates lemon sage warmth. You set the taper in its holder, crack open the cedar box, inhale its forest herb perfume, and write one last book of hours margin. Light counted, spice weighed, joints ennobled. Practice ends, but posture remains. Blanket pulled, knees nested, comet pebble tucked beneath cedar-scented pillow, you extinguish the taper. Darkness gathers gentle as wool, yet never empty. Glowworms cast faint constellations. Hearth embers warm air like distant suns. The manor's beams creak lullabies, and somewhere a peacock rearranges feathers with sleepy dignity. Breath by breath, you slip toward dreams. Dreams laced with rosemary corridors and nettle meadows, where Latin psalms ripple like soft water and every knee finds perfect, painless bend. The manor's pulse slows. Even the clock in the solar seems to defer its next tick. In this widening hush, let your thoughts float far downstream. Each inhale fills lungs with faint rosemary and cedar. Each exhale releases the last bright sparks of wakefulness. Muscles melt, joints settle, mind unbuttons its final, tidy concerns. Night expands, dark velvet woven with whispery glowworm threads. You are buoyed, weightless, rocked by remembered gears, by gentle hymns once sung, by laughter folded between psalms. Words fade to quiet hum. Hum thins to breath. Breath unspools to calm. Calm softens into silence, and silence, at last, carries you.